This isn't real wood. It's some kind of artificial material like plastic. These are not real trees. This isn't Earth.
I've got your card. Thank you. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And let us begin. Can an actor ever be in control of his career?
This actor can't. I don't know. I have heard stories about other actors who allege that they're in control of their careers and know when to wait and know when to go for a particular project. No, I've never had any control over anything except my bodily functions, thank God. That may change, of course, as I grow older and I dread it. But no, I have no control over my life at all. My professional life.
Pretty much in the same way, we've got no control over the traffic here. Moving cars. That was a horse box there, making a brief appearance on the show. So have you ever sought to keep in control of your career? That's what I'm really asking.
Well, yes, I have, because that's all part of the self-delusion of being an actor. One thinks that there may be a strategy, or there are certain parts one wants to play, and there are certain directors one wants to work with. But that swiftly evaporated in my life, mostly after I'd had a flirtation with a big film in the late 60s, when I worked for Columbia Pictures in Nicholas and Alexandra. And I really did believe the publicity that I was about to become a great big glossy movie star, which of course is what I really always wanted to be, and get lots of attention. But it didn't happen, and I was dumped from after Nicholas and Alexandra back into a bed sitting room. And it was from that kind of doldrums that I was rescued by the BBC when they decided to give me Doctor Who. So those disappointments, and there are lots more which I won't bore you with, have led me now to be very much more philosophical. I live in the country now, and I have a lot of cats, and of course I'm very happy. I have a garden and a wife and a house. And so I'm able to wait now. Not easily, but I can sweat it out. Because, you see, if I took seriously the propositions that come up about my career, I would be absolutely demented. I mean, it is nothing for me to get a telephone call saying, Tom, stand by, do you want to go to Florida tomorrow? Someone's been sacked off a film, or someone has died, or something like that. And I get into a state, and then nothing happens. It seems to me sometimes that I'm caught up in other people's fantasies, vis-a-vis the business. So now I just try and stay calm and, you know, put flea powder on the cats. Or anything.
On the cats? You can you pick and choose now, jobs?
Well, to a limited extent, yes, I can pick and choose. I do reject quite a lot of work, but it's not the sort of work that pleases me, so there's no virtue in that. No, I can't say. You see, the best work that's going is in the hands of, you know very well how competitive it is to be an actor. So a few actors in the area I might work in entirely dominate the projects I might be involved in. So, no, I can't. I can pick and choose what I reject. And, of course, I don't reject anything very good, as you can imagine. I'm quite anxious to work.
What is the area you would work in?
Well, I mean, I think I'd work with anybody and for anybody if they could pay reasonable money so that I can live. And if it's going to be fun to be with them. I mean, I don't want to suggest that I'm very serious about work in the sense that it's got to be serious work. Not at all. I'm a profoundly superficial sort of fellow. Or superficially profound, depends on your point of view. So it's got to be really fun, like doing this kind of madness in this old location where I was 13 years younger and lost my voice. I remember I had to dive into a pond, I had to sink into a pond, and I got an infection. And by the next day, on that story, the androids or something,
Android Invasion,
I remember my voice fans might notice my voice gets very croaky because I became ill, a bit ill. So really it's got to just be fun. That's the criterion. If it's fun.
What about quality of script?
Well, I mean, I've got no... I mean, how can I judge it? I mean, actors only judge how it affects them, don't they? I mean, if it's fun for me, and I try to make it fun for everyone else, then I'll take it, really. I don't really mind much what I do. You see, I think of myself really as an actor, as really an entertainer. I just want to divert people and tell them stories and amuse them. I mean, occasionally, you know, I've been in things where people have been amused by me. I remember when I played Macbeth in London to capacity business. I remember the audience thinking I was a scream. I mean, they laughed nearly from the moment I came on. And actually, at the end, they booed.
Didn't that bother you?
It did slightly. I thought there'd been a misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding, of course, was casting me as Macbeth. But I recovered. I remember I was so upset on that one that I thought I was going to die. There were 58 performances, all of them sold out because it was a book for the children's examinations. And having decided I was going to die...
On stage?
No, well, I thought I was going to die anyway before the end of the run. And there was no understudy or anything like that. And I remember I lived in a very small place and had very few possessions. But every night I came in, I grew very fond of the cast because they were wonderfully supportive and sympathetic in spite of my agony. And they used to run the taps when I was being sick in the dressing room to drown the ghastly noise. And I do remember... So every night I came in, I gave away all my possessions. Lovely, you know, first editions. I had a few first editions, lovely old scripts in the past. National Theatre scripts, noted and marked up, and other little presents. Till finally, I had nothing left except a toothbrush. And no one wanted the toothbrush, otherwise I would have given that away. And I had a chaise longue, which I couldn't bring to the theatre. And then suddenly it was the 58th performance, and it was all over.
And
we were in the pub afterwards. I was still alive, and I had nothing. And I didn't have the nerve to say, please excuse me, could I have my possessions back? So that was Macbeth.
Did you judge Doctor Who in the same way? I mean, that was quite a few years ago, and you said you'd been dumped by the film industry. Those are your words, not mine. Did you judge Doctor Who on the same basis? Did you think, well, this looks fun?
Yes, I did, yes. I had frequently
or
in the
did you
past...
just think, oh, I want to eat, so I better do this?
Well, I think it's fun to have fun, but part of having fun is being able to eat as well. I thought... I'd often thought in the past how interesting it was. You know, I watched William Hartnell and Pat Troughton, whom I admired very much. I rather liked Troughton. I'd seen him do a great Quilp in Great Expectations. In fact... Oh, no, it's not. No. It's just an innocent horsewoman. And so when it came to me, I was in very, very low state as well. I really was desolated and mixing plaster on a building site. And Bill Slater and Barry Letts were very kind. And suddenly I was Doctor Who, and I just thought it was fun, and it was. Mm-hmm. I think, should we go and sit somewhere else?
All right. Come on.
Because you're rehearsing all the time. Most actors, as you know, love to rehearse, don't they?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so, therefore, you can rehearse, and even if something's not very good, you can retrieve it somehow. You can polish it. In the States and Canada, often it's long days when they just simply rehearse and shoot. Now, this is no way to discover something. If you're playing a marvelous old, the most famous poseur in the world, one of the great comic characters of the last 100 years, which Sherlock Holmes is, you've got to be able to work on it. Otherwise, it just becomes a kind of series of arias.
Yeah.
And then you don't, and then it's rather boring, you know, because you need the Holmes. What makes Holmes absolutely dynamite is the absolute collision with, with good villains, and he, of course, is amazing showing off. But
what about directors who work on that kind of thing? You often hear directors interviewed saying they're actors' directors. Can that ever be true with that sort of setup?
Well, I suppose it can be true in the sense that they are sympathetic to actors. I mean, you know, I don't think directors should describe themselves as actors, directors. They should just call themselves directors and get on with it. But they often mean by that, you see, one of the things that actors worry about, I mean, wonderful actors like Simon Callow worry about, and there are of many other actors, that they're often a bit suspicious about directors, you see, because, I mean, actors are often very timid, and then they get... and so the director says, this is the way I see this shot, you see, they're talking about the shot, or this is the way I see this character. Now, if you fundamentally disagree with that, and you're doing it for the money, and you've got no clout, like I often would have no clout if I get a job on a movie, I'm a supporting actor, and so I've got no... I can't say rubbish. Whereas in the theatre over here, when you're talking, it's challenging all the time, and it's exhilarating. So when directors say, now, this is what I want you to come in from here, and this is how the conversation starts, most conscientious actors who are a bit experienced will have thought something for themselves, you see. Now, good directors might say that and say, oh, do you have another idea? Those are the sort of directors I like. I adore people who like my ideas.
Did you get directors like that on Doctor Who?
It was easier on Doctor Who because I was the link, you see, and I also was very interested in how they shot it, and I was the only saving thing for a director who would describe a setup, and I say, we did that last week. So they were grateful.
Was it like that from the word go?
No, it wasn't. It was like that quite soon, because it dawned on me about the vocabulary of shots they could use on the interiors, say, in the TARDIS, or the running shots that came week after week. It dawned on me that I could explain to directors what we had done, because the directors couldn't have seen it. The stuff wasn't edited yet. And so I got on mostly with the directors, mostly very well.
Did the work in rehearsal transfer easily to the studio, or was it always a bit of a rush in the studio?
It was always a bit of a rush, but that became also part of it, you know, trying to beat the clock all the time and still keep the quality. And I never, of course, watched rushes, unless we had time to shoot something. And I've never watched rushes. I've never watched anything in detail that I've done, unless I'd had the power to say, let's do it again. I see no point in watching rushes. That's what Fellini often does to change the angle of the shot. Just drives a car or a motorbike through it.
And cuts to going the other way.
I don't know about that.
So, would you say you particularly got on with the directors in Doctor Who?
I'd say in general that I got on very well with most of them, and some of them became friends. I used to, however, have disagreements, naturally. I quite thrive on disagreements at work. I'm quite demanding at work, and I can stand heat from other people as well. But one area of disagreement which I look back on now quite fondly was, often we used to do a sequence, especially an interior sequence, and I'd come flying through a door, and then we'd say, let's do that again, and I would say sarcastically, why? I'd say, up there, why? What went right? And then they'd say, well, just do it again. I'd insist, and it would often be because the scenery moved.
Yeah.
Now, it used to drive me crazy that people used to worry about whether the scenery moved or not, because if we were in Gallifrey in the constellation of Kasterborous, you know, what did it matter if the scenery moved? Maybe the whole style of architecture there, you know, they'd gone past the Corbusier, and wherever people came through doors, whole buildings moved, especially if you banged the door. And some of my American supporters often used to ask me, you know, the way these people who are doing theses on Doctor Who would say to me, we liked the way you used to come through the door in Doctor Who. It was very special. I'd never seen anyone come through a door like you. Well, of course, I'm not known for my naturalism. I can't even really come through a door without a lot of rehearsal. But the reason why, of course, I came through the door in such a special way in Doctor Who was that if I didn't come creeping through, the scenery would shake, and we'd have to do the shot again. So I devised a way of coming through a door in order to preempt. Hello again. In order... I've often had I used to be terribly attracted by women who frequented horses' backs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's a very nice looking lady. And so, one devised all these sort of ways of doing things. And if the director agreed with me, then he became an intimate friend. If he disagreed with me, he became an implacable enemy. I really can't bear people who disagree with me. I always think they have such bad taste. And people who find me amusing, I just adore them, yeah. And, of course, people who adore me, I adore them right back. But in Doctor Who, one had to look after oneself. One got used to the whole routine. So in running shots in a corridor, which was the bane of our lives, when the writers would write too much dialogue, and we only had a 20-foot corridor, and you're supposed to be flying along this corridor, and you've got to say 20 lines, a lot of it quite plotty. Well, this actually was resolved by the simple expedient of suddenly, as I was driving along, rushing along a corridor, I used to suddenly skid to a halt saying, shh. And it would be a very tense thing. And I'd say, did you hear something? And she'd say, no. And then I'd say, well, what were you saying? Then we'd do the dialogue, and I'd say, come on, let's go. And this was simply because we couldn't either get the fishing rod mic in, or there wasn't enough space to do the travelling. So one learned all these sort of tricks. And you see, the thing is about Doctor Who, which is such fun to do, unlike life, is that, you see, it's not really an acting part. It's not really an acting part, as you know, in the sense that there is no development, really. The predictability, when you play heroes, the real problem is how do you colour predictability? When you have a character who will always come down on the moral side of things, there could never be a sexual entanglement or indeed an emotional entanglement where there is no greed. So the actor playing that part is absolutely predictable, as all heroes are predictable. Like Holmes is predictable, but I failed a couple of times doing him. So the thing is, how do you colour the predictability?
Doesn't that require, you say it's not an acting part, doesn't that require a more imaginative form of acting?
Oh, I'm not saying it doesn't require imagination, but I mean, it does not develop. I mean, in drama, a series of events occur, don't they? And these events have an effect on people. They fall in love, or they fall out of love, or they become penniless, or impotent, or get some disease. And these events actually cause a development. Now, in Doctor Who, there is no such development. The Doctor will never change. He may grow old and fade away after hundreds of years, but he will always be the same. In principle, he'll be the same. So the fun is, how do you colour that in the in-between time?
Did you always accept that he'd be the same, or did you ever try to push for some kind of change, for the Doctor to learn from experience?
No. I think that the Doctor only learned... I think the fun thing is, I'm a great fan of a great American writer called Kurt Vonnegut, who's one of my great fantasy favourite writers. And what I liked about Doctor Who, of course, what we really like about other people, what we like about a pretty place like this, is what reflects our own taste. And what I liked about him, what I really liked about him was, I played him a bit like me. That is, someone, a middle-aged man who wouldn't grow up. I mean, the thing is, the Doctor must really not learn anything, except in an intellectual way. So in a situation when I came out of the TARDIS and there was a kind of 12-foot King Kong there, my idea was that I would always say, hello. You know, like I might say to a small child or a dog or a friend, hello. And which he'd go, boom, and knock me down. But when I recovered, I used to say to Sarah J., we'll have to look out for him. In other words, the assumption was that everything was innocent until there was some reason for us to be suspicious. And I found that side of his character very appealing. So it was always now, always now. Kurt Vonnegut wrote in one of his novels about a character called Kilgore Trout, who appealed to me enormously. And Kilgore Trout would say, hello, Nick. And then the car would go by like that one day. And then now, the whole experience is gone in the past. And he turns and says, hello, Nick. It always started again. Of course, there is an illness, which is apparently horrific, that occasionally people have like that. But that side of it agreed to it. We always start again. And we always start on an upbeat. That's the thing I liked about the optimism, which is very difficult to do in real life. But it was the happiest. It was the happiest job of my life, really. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, this is Shoe Lane.
That's right, that's right. Yes, we ran down here.
Did a lot of running.
A lot of running in Doctor Who, yes.
How did your experience of working on Doctor Who change from the beginning to the end? Because by the end, you were virtually the only person who'd been with it all that time.
Yes, I think that I have to say that generally it was a pleasure to go to work on Doctor Who, you know. It really was a pleasure all the time. When it began to be not such an acute pleasure, I began to realize I was running out of steam on the program. By this time, of course, we had changed script editor several times, and we had a new producer. And it was absolutely crucial that one was very sympathetic with the script editor and producer's attitudes. It's absolutely crucial, you see. And so as people began to come in, new people, I had been with it so long that I became very proprietorial. Now, this, of course, not much fun for the others, because when they come in, the leading man is proprietorial about it. It means, you know, that I was perhaps less flexible about new ideas, about changes in costume, about whether they were going to change the style of the music. And I felt it was my program. Of course, it wasn't my program, but I felt it was my program. And when I began to have these feelings... Well, wow.
The corporation have turned up.
The rubbish... I'm terribly interested in rubbish, actually. Yeah. I would have been a dustman if I could have possibly, but there was no money in it. Also, there are no famous dustmen, and I wanted to be famous. But, you see, it wasn't my program, and but I felt it was my program.
How do you look back on that attitude you had then?
Well, of course, I mean, I was wrong to have that. I was wrong to have that attitude, because it meant actually that I was becoming inflexible. And when I felt I was becoming inflexible, then the pleasure evaporated, and I thought, well, I think it's time to let someone else have a go. Of course, people warned me, not the production office. I was amazed at how blithely they took my resignation. I'd like to say they said, Christ, Tom, don't leave the program. But I said, I think I've had enough. And they said, OK, Tom, we understand. So there I was, and I left the program. I was, of course, slightly nerve-wracked because people said you're typecast and you'll find it very difficult to work in any other program. I thought they were wrong. But they were right. They were right. Shall we sit down?
Yeah. What about those, when you said you would have an input about all aspects of the programme because you felt proprietorial about it?
Right.
You know, what sort of ideas were you having? A lot's been said about what you thought about characters for the companions.
Well, yes. You see, I felt all the time that the program should be strange. I mean, I never felt, quite honestly, I mean, I don't mean to denigrate the work of the past of other people. I mean, it was a great success, and I'm very grateful to have been in a success. But I often felt that we didn't exploit the strangeness of the situation, both of the character, the interior of the TARDIS, the attitudes of some of the characters. I used to find that very wearisome. I wanted it to be... I once actually did dig my toes in once. I can't remember what it was, but we were filming at Ealing, and the producer, Philip Hinchcliffe, who became a good friend of mine, and was very kind and indulgent, he wasn't there, and we had to... we met on a planet somewhere, and there were some awful monsters around me, and I had to seize one of them, it said, and hold a knife to his neck, and say... take me to your leader, or I'll kill you with, the knife. Now, often on filming, you can't imagine, I was working on 4 scripts at a time very often. I didn't know where I was. I used to learn lines very swiftly, and then someone would tell me what to do. So when we came on film, I was presented with this line. I said, I won't do it. I will not use a knife in the series, you see. And the director, who's a good pal also, called David Maloney, said, so what are we going to do, he said. So I said, well, we're on a strange planet. I think I'll grab hold of him very fiercely and then produce a jelly baby and press it against his jugular vein and say, take me to your leader or I'll kill you with this deadly jelly baby. Well, David Maloney was very skeptical about this, and I don't blame him. But I wouldn't use the knife, so they had to do this, you see. And then Philip afterwards said, well, it turned out to be quite funny. I'm not trying to be clever about saying that this was a marvellous answer from me, because, you see, I used to pick up what used to amuse the children. Now, the logic, the childlike logic, which is ineluctably hard, was that on a strange planet, a monster wouldn't know the difference between a jelly baby and a Mills bomb or a hydrogen bomb, so you could bluff him. It was my conviction that made it impressive. And one of them fellows said, well, you know, go ahead and kill him. I think I bit the head off the jelly baby and said, no one gives me orders. That was my idea of a joke. And so we pushed on from there.
Did you feel quite a bit of resistance from directors to your ideas of jokes?
Well, I think yes, because I have probably a very childlike sense of humour. And I also believe that in all situations there is irony and humour. Well, that's not very new, is it? Of course, there's nothing in life which is devoid of humour. When people... I find, you know, if I go to a funeral, I'm very keen on funerals. I've been to lots of funerals. In fact, I got started as an actor going to funerals. You see, I'm old enough to remember when life was more exciting than it is now, albeit in a different way. One of the great tragedies, in my view, was the invention of penicillin. And I mean by that penicillin has made people live longer, and I suppose a lot of people are quite glad about that. I myself am not totally ungrateful. But I remember when people got a nail in their shoe on a Saturday night at a dance, and they were dead by Tuesday. And of course I remember, and therefore life was very exciting, not for that person perhaps, but it was dramatic in the family. You had something to talk about in the pub that night. And of course a good dose of the flu, or pneumonia, or tonsillitis, or diphtheria used to sweep through the district, you know, and keep the turnover going. And because I was a very religious boy, I used to go to lots of funerals. And here's how I became an actor. At a funeral, because I sometimes do 3 a day in the peak season. The peak season was about November.
They were people you knew, were they? Or
No. I'd go to any old funeral. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. I wasn't particular. I just loved going to funerals. So, anyway, we used to get... as an altar boy, I used to swing the thurible. I think I used to get threepence to go, you see. So after a funeral, you got threepence. Well, threepence was all right, you know, about 1942, 43. That was good money, a threepenny bit. Anyway, one day, to cut a very long story very short, I was on the 3rd funeral that morning. It was slashing it down with rain, and I was freezing cold and hungry. No breakfast, you see, because I was a Roman Catholic. You had to fast if you were going to the sacraments. That's what started my interest in fasting. This day, I'm so cold and so tired and so hungry, I began to weep with the cold. Anyway, the funeral was over and we threw the clods of earth on and we buried this old lady. It wasn't a shocking surprise. She was about 110, but people wept, you know, as if it were a surprise. And I would look around and see who had a red nose, or who had one eye, or who had a limp. I'm a bit like Charles Dickens in that way. I'm very preoccupied not only by death, but by especially wooden legs. I rather admired wooden legs when I was a boy, and longed to have one. Later on, I played Long John Silver. But anyway, I started to weep, you see, with the cold. After the funeral, a man squeezed my arm, which was unusual. And I thought to myself, why is he squeezing my arm? And I'll tell you why. He thought that I was weeping because I was sorry his old mother had died. And he squeezed my arm and he gave me a 2-shilling piece. Amazing, isn't it? That's 8 threepenny bits. So I had an 800% increase in wages. And I suddenly thought, quite suddenly, how vulnerable I am. It took me about 15 seconds before I was corrupted, and I thought, He gave me the money because he thought I was sorry for his mother. That's why he thought I was crying. And after that, it was tears and snot all the way. And the other silly buggers were getting about threepence a go, and I was sometimes getting 2 and 6, which was 1/8 of a pound. And that's when it began to dawn on me, really, because I've often thought that a definition of an actor might be a sort of professional pleaser. And that's what I did to please them. I cried. And I've been doing it ever since. Not crying, laughing sometimes. But there we are. Should we go somewhere else?
Yeah.
This bench is cold.
This way?
Of course, I've always admired the dead. I find them so uncritical. And where I live in the country, on 2 sides of my house, there are churchyards, and And I wake up in the morning, and no matter how sorry for myself I feel, I look out at the gravestones and I think, well, it could be worse. And so I bought myself a second-hand gravestone in order to give some money to the parish, really. Unfortunately, the man who'd had it before me, his name wasn't Baker, but I've had it smoothed down a bit. And just on the top of it, being modest, there's a star, and underneath it says, Tom Baker, 1934, dash. I didn't have the courage to put in the second date. As for the epitaph, I'll leave that to someone. Shall we have a quick look into church?
Yeah.
Come on. Growing old? Yes. Yes, it does bother me a bit. Love fades. Ambitions aren't realized. Old friends die. Bottoms sag. Breasts become pendulous. And then comes the chilling thrill of the first varicose vein. After that, of course, things go much quicker.
Actually, I want to get something from the post office, so can we just nip up
Yes,
with anything?
sure. I remember a chap offering me a job in America. He talked about this kind of madness of our business, and he wanted me to do a 2-hour cabaret, and I said, yes, but how much will it be? And he said, well, would $12,000 an hour do? I said, what, for a 2-hour job? He said, yes, $12,000 an hour. Well, naturally, I said yes.
I want to talk a bit about Doctor Who scripts, because you were talking about people not using the format imaginatively enough. I mean,
Well, it was
how did
simply
you deal with
that I
that?
just thought it should be more fantastical. For example, I do remember one time we were in Wells Cathedral in Somerset, and I wanted to do a cut-in shot of a pair of Wellingtons in the whole interior of Wells Cathedral, and therefore use it later in a programme when I had to say to Sarah Jane or someone, I'll just get my Wellingtons. And when I went into the Wellington cupboard, which is, through a little door in a TARDIS, then we'd cut to the inside of Wells Cathedral. Those are the small things that I felt we should have pursued.
Why don't you think the writers exploited that sort of
Well, I
idea?
think that the writers used to get very fed up with me making suggestions to them, you see. I'm a compulsive suggester of things. And, of course, people do get fed up. But also, I'm afraid, I have to admit, I'm not always very tactful. And I think in our business, where people are working at feverish pitch all the time, that one has to be tactful. And sometimes when I'm enthusiastic, my sense of tact fails me. And so often they say, oh, it's Tom going on again. Let's just get it shot. That's right.
Did that annoy you?
Well, yes, of course it annoyed me, because, I long for people to agree with me. What I really like is someone to say, Tom, that's a marvellous idea. And then my happiness is complete. But, of course, most of my ideas are terrible. When I was at the BBC, I was notorious for my bad taste. Anyway, there we are.
In your time as Doctor Who, the programme actually went abroad for the first time. What was it like going to Paris?
Well, it was fun going abroad. It was just fun having new locations for the audiences to look at.
But you had the press following you.
We had the press following us, yes. Oh, gosh, yes, that's right, yes. Oh, that's right. That was the first time, actually, I'd been followed by the press, and we had 4 photographers and 4 journalists from very popular newspapers. I remember the names very well.
But you're not going to say
of the newspapers. I remember they were following me and keeping their eyes on me all the time, hoping for a wonderful kind of off-camera story of whatever kind, because they were good journalists. In other words, they were like kind of revved-up bloodhounds. And I do remember marvelling at their kind of casualness and their cynicism. Well, I remember one night they took me out to dinner. So there were 8 journalists, photographers and journalists, and me, and I don't know, 2 or 3 other people. At the end of the dinner, I do remember this about journalists. They're different from you and me. They're tough. And this, at this dinner, we had lots of wine and lovely food. And when it came, the guide said, the way often Englishmen are abroad, he said, "Oi, monsieur," because he was in Paris. Monsieur, he said, or monsieur. Give us the bill, will you? The bill, non, monsieur, said the waiter. He said, "Oh, also, you should make it 8 copies." Waiter shrugged. French waiter's not impressed by that kind of greed. And I said, when the waiter went away, I said to this fellow, I said, that's a bit hard, isn't it? 8 of you, that's a bit cynical. I said, if I asked for another copy of this bill, I said, you'd write about it in the article. They said, too bleeding right we would, too bleeding right we would. So I've always treated journalists with a certain amount of circumspection.
Yes, yes. Was the shooting in Paris quite easy?
It was, yes, quite easy, because at that time, I don't know if it's the same now, at that time, of course, Doctor Who was completely unknown. So...
In France?
In France, it was entirely unknown, so the idea of a middle-aged man storming down a street with a great hat on, I looked like a Lautrec poster, and people quite liked the long scarf, you know, and everybody looked at my hair, which was very long in those days, you know, and thought, as they said, you know, une perruque, but it wasn't. So it was quite easy, because I was unknown, and the French are so cool about these things.
Moving on from Doctor Who, you said that people said you'd be typecast. You didn't believe it, but you said that happened.
Yes. What
did you do to combat that?
Well, there was nothing I could do to combat it, and there's nothing I can still do to combat it, because there's no doubt about it. I labour under the influence of Doctor Who, and people associate me always with Doctor Who. I've done very little television. In fact, in the last year since I left Doctor Who, scarcely any television at all. Mostly I've been in the theatre, which is more flexible. And it wasn't until a couple of seasons ago, when I got Life and Love of a She-Devil, that I then had, you know, a different role to play on television.
Yes, did your religious background help you in that part at all?
Father Ferguson actually did get me a lot of attention. It was very popular in Holland, I understand. And I've become a great star in Abu Dhabi. I keep wondering how I can exploit that, really. But I'm a big star in Abu Dhabi. But to play Father Ferguson was fun because it broke away from anything else I'd done. Since I played Rasputin for Sam Spiegel in the late 60s, I think. And so I was also faced, of course, with the inevitable dilemma of playing a love scene. And then I used to think about when I was playing Doctor Who, I just made an allusion to, well, to wanting to be different, really. You see, I think that when you're decorating a room or when you're trying to play a character in television, you have real words. You only have real words. Hello. His name's Nick. What's your name? Claire. Claire, this is Nick.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
He hasn't got any freckles?
No, just a few. Well.
Anyway, it's nice to see you, Claire. How do you spell Claire? C-L-A-I-R. All right. Nice to see you. So, where was I? Oh, yes. It came to the problem of playing a love scene, a very passionate love scene, which took 11 takes. This may be very self-conscious, because I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at anything, really, but I do remember the technician kept shouting, "No, that won't do. We've seen his wedding tackle." BBC, of course, are rather careful about that. But it was... You don't mind us talking about sex in the street?
No, I was wondering what I was hearing as I came out.
That's right. I sometimes wonder what I'm saying.
In the Ark in Space, that was one of your early stories. So how much were you feeling your way in those early days?
Well, I mean, I think apart from the repetition making me more confident, I was always feeling my way. I mean, I do remember that when I first got the job of Doctor Who, which I was so grateful for, and it was announced, you know, they announced a new Doctor Who. Now, in those days, it was an enormous piece of news. And I signed the contract. And coming from mixing plaster on a building site, that was a great relief to me. And we sat down at lunch, and Barry Letts, I owe him so much, and I'm so grateful to him. A wonderful man. And he said, because he's a wonderful man, he's a much nicer man than me, he said, "So, Tom, what are you going to do with it?" And I said, "I don't know." And they were a bit daunted by this. They said, "Oh, come on." And I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And I don't think that I ever really knew what I was going to do with it. I just played it as we nudged along. I think I always knew what I didn't want to do with it. But I never really knew what I was going to do with this marvelous piece of luck, except try to play the kind of innocence of the character. Yes, innocence, that's all. a character who just sweetly responded to what was going on around him and could be just as diverted by a leaf blowing across the landscape as a car going through, or an encounter with a monster, or the anxiety of Elizabeth Sladen, twisting her ankle, so that we could devise two strands of a narrative. I was happy.
Did you improvise any dialogue with this?
No, you can't improvise on television simply because...
In the rehearsal stage?
Oh, in the rehearsal. I improvised entirely because I like to rehearse at 100 miles an hour. So, I was never bothered about not being able to remember the lines. The thing to do was to keep the temperature up and the tempo going. Oh, yes, we often improvised around scenes before we went back to the script, yes, but that's quite common.
You said you didn't know quite so much what you were going to do, but you knew what you didn't want to do.
Yes.
What were those things that you didn't want to do?
Well, I suppose it sounds terribly immodest, but it doesn't matter. It's all in the past now. What I didn't want to do was to be the leading man in an adventure program on television and be like any other leading man. I wanted to be different. I didn't want to be bad-tempered in a predictable way. I wanted to be surprising. That's right. I wanted to surprise the audience. And I also wanted myself, as a character, to develop a sense of surprise. Nothing can be more disappointing in life than to meet somebody who doesn't have a sense of surprise. Without a sense of surprise, nothing is possible. Nothing joyous is possible. And I don't mean a surprise just by being eccentric or walking backwards or whatever, but to try to surprise the audience by finding a point of view in the character that illuminates the script, because any actor worth his salt, to begin with, must trust the script. You've got to trust the script. If the script finally betrays you, well, then you've got to perhaps improve it. But a sign of insecurity in an actor is if he'll betray the script first. You must try to make it work. Because anyone can say, what a charming girl. Anyone can say, well, let's rewrite it. Any gobshite can do that. Any idiot can say, let's rewrite it. The real trick is to make it work. Because if we don't trust the writers, we're nowhere. We have no future without writers. We have no present without writers, but more importantly, no future.
Listen, it's so noisy out here. I'm just going to pop in there and get some earplugs for us, so I won't be a minute, okay?
Would you give me some jelly babies while you're in there?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
2 boxes. Just for old time's sake. Playing Doctor Who. Yes, it was the happiest time of my life. I never just wanted to be liked. I don't even want to be loved. I want to be adored. Isn't it a glorious day? When I played Doctor Who, I was adored. It'll never happen again. But I was adored once.
I managed to... Oh. Sorry. Oh, hello.
In exactly 3 minutes, our simulated Earth village will evaporate. And you with it.
Oh, don't go. Stay. Just for a few minutes. Then we can all go together.
I always regretted that so often we had to resolve the stories with an explosion. Such a pity.
Not another day. Oh, well, let's brazen it out. Wonder who I am today. Am I alive or dead? Good God. Must go out and get the papers. Check the obituaries. If mine's in, I can stop worrying. I've always felt at home with the dead. Terrible things. Bloody sunrise. A second-rate Turner. Gratted, I'm still alive. Oh, that Tom Baker. You silly old bugger. I wonder when I really go to heaven. I hope so. I hope so. So like to go to heaven. Hello. I often go by cab. Taxi drivers are notorious chatters to customers they think they recognize. And I got in the cab and the driver suddenly out of nowhere, he said, "I know you, don't I?" I'm very used to this kind of thing. And I said, possibly. He said, "Yes, it's a pleasure to have you in the cab, Mr. Pertwee," he said. So, I took this as manfully as I possibly could. And, but he would go on. Yeah, he said, "You were my favorite, Mr. Pertwee. Quite like William Hartnell and Pat Troughton and everything, yeah, but you was the best. You was witty and elegant, I suppose, really." So I said, "Yes. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, he said, "Yeah, best of all." He said, who was the fellow before, the fellow after you? What was he? The fellow who was always drunk, tall fellow, big eyes. I said, "What, with curly hair?" He said, "That's the one, yeah, what was he called? Yeah, he was always drunk, wasn't he? Pissed as a lord all the time." I said, "His name was Tom Baker, I think." He said, "That's it, yeah, Tom Baker." I wonder what happened to him. And I said, "He died." He said, "Did he?" I said, "Yeah, oh yeah. He died, poor as a church mouse. He died in terrible agony in a basement flat in Clapham." And the cab driver said, "Oh, funny, isn't it? Never heard anything about that at all." Yeah. "Oh, well, anyway, Mr. Pertwee, you was the one for me, sir." "Where did you say that restaurant was?" I said, "Langton Street." He said, "Well, we're nearly there now." I was appalled that he wasn't remotely, I don't expect him to be grieved, but his acceptance of my alleged death rather wounded my vanity, sense of self-importance. I got out. He said, could you just sign a pad, sir?" So I said, "Yeah, sure." So I signed his little book. "Best wishes, cordially yours, Tom Baker, R.I.P." Of course, when I gave him back his book, I closed it. He said, "Thanks a lot, Mr. Pertwee. Thanks a lot, sir. Ta-ra. Good luck, mate." I've seen him somewhere before. Looks a bit like... No, can't be. Excuse me. Ahoy there! I'm sorry to bother you. Could you tell me where Tom Baker lives? He's an actor. He used to be an actor. He was very famous years ago. He was in a a big series. He's dead.
Really?
Yeah, I saw his gravestone in a churchyard round here somewhere. Oh, no, just a minute. I remember now, yeah. He died in agony in a basement flat in Clapham, yeah. Absolutely penniless. Always drunk he was. Nobody came to his funeral, you know. Yeah, they say that if you go to his gravestone, they say that you can still smell the beer. Oh, hold on. No, maybe he was assassinated. Or was that Abraham Lincoln? I think, yeah. No. You a friend of his, are you?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah. Well, can't help you, Cock. Sorry about that. Sarah! Sure, I've seen that fellow somewhere before.
Ah, yes. The schoolhouse. Must oil those brakes.
Hey, what kept you? Come on in. Juice is down. You're very welcome.
Mr. Baker, it's very good of you to agree to be interviewed. I would like to just make an observation that you have no new film coming out, according to my producer and to my notes, and you're not, as far as I know, announced to be in a forthcoming theatrical production. Therefore, I wonder why on earth you are actually doing this interview.
Why am I doing the interview?
By that I mean, is there anything else to say?
Well, perhaps there might be something new to say if someone actually devised some new questions.
Ah, all right. When you got the part of Doctor Who, I think, and most of your fans agree with me, that you actually fitted very well into the fantasy aspect of the program. Would you describe yourself as a practiced fantasist?
Well, I was brought up in a house where fantasy was in the air. The place was strewn with fantasy. Of course, fantasy is often related to misapprehensions. My grandmother, for example, believed passionately that monkeys could talk. But mostly I think that my love of fantasy actually sprang from the intense religious atmosphere in the house in which I was brought up. I mean, I remember from a very early age, I used to be caught up in huge concepts. I remember when I was only about 5 years old being caught up with the problem of the omnipresence of God. This, of course, made me terribly self-conscious as a child. The omnipotence of God and the omniscience of God I certainly could cope with, but his omnipresence, that God himself should be in the room with me, any room, all the time, this made me very, very inhibited. In fact, I suppose when I look back on it, the very first time my mother beat me up, she beat me up several times, of course, things were different in those days before penicillin, I think the first time she beat me up actually was in consequence of the omnipresence. What had happened was this. I got off to school, I was 5, of course, and Miss O'Malloy, who I can remember very, very well, my teacher, actually was teaching us at the age of 5 that God was everywhere, or, as we 5-year-olds used to say quite smartly, omnipresent. This, at 5 years old, had a cataclysmic effect on me. And I remember when I went home, this is leading up to the beating up, before the penicillin, I went home and I said to my mother, "Do you know, Mum," I said, "that God's everywhere." Now, my poor mother had been brought up like me, also on fantasy, I suppose, and she was very busy also, and she said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah, I mean, he's everywhere. Did you know that, Mum?" I said, "God's everywhere." And she said, I know he is. I said, "Is he in the cupboard?" She said, "Yes, he is. Let's watch it." I said, "He's not up the chimney, is he?" She said, "He's everywhere. Now, just watch it." I did not detect the signs of my impending blows. The next thing I remember I said, Is he in the lavatory?" She said, "Watch it." But I didn't watch it. She said, "He's everywhere." I said, "Oh, yeah." There was a pause, and I said, "Is he up my nose?" And that's when the blow fell.
That was the first time I was beaten up.
I must say you're very, very cheerful about these ghastly incidents.
Well, I am very cheerful about them. Like most people, I'm very, very cheerful and made very, very happy by the things that I've survived. You must have noticed that. People who recover from major operations, no matter what it is, the removal of whatever, you know, whether it's an appendicectomy, which is the removal of an appendix, or, say, a hippoectomy, which is the removal of a horse, if you want to know a Greek word, or, in my case, surviving the beatings up I got, or the bombings from the Germans. Yes, I look back on it actually with great glee. They were quite happy times, really. I mean, after all, it was all those fantasies. All artists, I think, and dare I describe myself as an artist, it does make you a bit self-conscious, but I'm getting used to other people saying it now. I got started as an actor as a consequence of some of these things that you describe as ghastly incidents. When I was 5 years old, I began to be a professional liar, which might be a description of an actor. There are lots of descriptions of actors, but I would call some of them professional liars. In fact, I think quite a lot of them should be locked up, and me among them sometimes. Anyway, when I was 5 years old, not only the concept of the omnipresence of God, or the omniscience of God, or the omnipotence of God, we also were, of course, into the concept of absolution. We were into the concept of mortal sin and venial sin. And at the age of 5, I actually was to make my first confession, which I did, and every Wednesday after that, every Wednesday morning, I'd say, Tom Baker and Leslie Hampson, confession to Father Barry. And so little Leslie Hampson and little Tom Baker would trudge along to confession. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that life was not packed with events. There were certain things going on even when I was 5, like, for example, we were at war. The Germans were bombing us, and I was grateful to them. I think, as a child, the greatest fun I had outside of inventing lies in confession, outside of going to funerals and thinking about going to the arms of Jesus very soon, because I was enjoying all that as well. That helped me to be an actor. I think the other excitement in my life was Germans bombing us. You see, little children just love that, don't they? Houses were on fire. My house wasn't on fire. But other houses were on fire. Some people were killed, I heard. Whatever that was, blown to pieces. I was just used to boxes and solemn funerals. Also, of course, it kept us away largely from school. Also, it kept me away most of the time from school. It meant that I was driven to help the war effort. Now, you're looking at me as if perhaps you don't really believe that. I promise you, and I could produce documentary evidence, that at 5 or 6 or 7 we were helping in the war effort. Everybody was. Now, my effort, and there's a whole chapter in my little autobiography here, my contribution to the war effort was collecting rubbish. Salvage, it was called in those days. And I used to go round with my friend Leslie Hampson, my fellow little liar, going to confession, and we used to collect salvage. And so while other boys were in other people's houses or not doing anything, we were helping the war effort. Collecting cardboard boxes and everything, to the extent of which I was decorated, I think, by the Lord Mayor of London, who was then Lord Sefton, who was a descendant of one of the Prime Ministers of England. And I was decorated for my war effort for collecting cardboard boxes. And this led to my enduring affection for rubbish. And for gardens. And for God. This is my garden. The Garden of England. Garden of Eden. Gardens make me think of serpents and sin. And sin must be confessed. Actors, of course, are professional confessors.
But it was very, very difficult for me to go along with a sense of guilt at the age of 5.5, say, and say to Father Barry, I'm feeling guilty. Now, this actually set my little mind, such as it is or was, racing. What I had to do was invent things. I had to think of things. Now, what could I think of? At 5, nothing was happening to me. In conversation in the schoolyard with older boys who used to go to confession also on Saturdays, I started picking up phrases. And so I find myself at 5.5 kneeling down, Father, forgive me for I've sinned. It is 1 week since my last confession, and since then I have semicolon, or colon if you want. And then I would go into my confession. Father, I've had impure thoughts. How many times, my son? Oh, all the time. Well, no, not all the time. No,
Just some of the time, Father. I see, yes. What else? Well, I've looked sideways at my mother, and sometimes I haven't been obedient, and sometimes I've talked in class, and sometimes I've dawdled on the way to school. And he'd go, think of Jesus. In all these difficulties, think of Jesus, my son. I didn't know why he called me my son at 5. I didn't think of him as my father. And so he would give me a penance to say. And at the age of 5, I would tumble out, feeling better at the age of 5. Now, this inventiveness, this lying, honestly, there were no sins in my life, got me started. There you are.
And now in adult life, what is your preference? Where does your real taste lie? In the extravagant fantasy figures or in the more realistic characters?
As if there is a big difference. I think that my natural taste really is to play extravagant characters and to play fantastical characters if you want, or fantasy characters. You see, I believe, sometimes I get into trouble in my local pub when I say it's terribly important, isn't it, is separating fantasy from reality. And they say, bugger off, Baker. Bloody old poser. What do you know about bloody fantasy? And I said, well, I think most people really have difficulty with fantasy, don't you? Wouldn't you say so, John, or whoever it is, or Arthur, or Fred? They say, balls. They said, I'm no bloody fantasist, I know exactly what I want. Of course, they are entirely wrong, and I am partially right. I think that everybody, without exception, if they would tell the truth, everybody is actually preoccupied by the extravagant. Everybody secretly has fantastic wishes. The basic wishes to be, for example, financially secure. I mean, what about the fantasy of doing the pools? What about the fantasy of lusting after some beautiful man as he goes by? What about the fantasy of owning a great car like a Bristol or a Rolls Royce? What about the fantasy of just going on a great holiday? What about the fantasy of being beautiful? Everybody, I think, has these. What about the fantasy of meeting a hero? So therefore, when I say I would rather play extravagant and fantastical characters, I think I'm in a very big group. I think that most people would. I think that most people are more interested in fantastic characters than the so-called straight, rather drab, understated characters.
The character of the Doctor, which you play so successfully, has endured now for 25 years. When you look back on how you played him, do you consider that perhaps you thought of yourself as being godlike?
Well, of course, when I was playing Doctor Who, I did think of him as being a god, in the sense that he lived on a higher plane. Of course, you know, everybody has their idols, and all the other leading characters in these fictions that go on, whether they are detectives or whether they are detectives private or public, or whatever they are, purport to actually resolve problems for people. That's what most television is about, like most popular literature is about good and evil. And evil rears its lovely head, and in literature and in television, good triumphs. We, of course, know what a load of old cobblers that is, because in life, evil frequently triumphs. Now, therefore, Doctor Who, he always triumphed. But I felt that he was different. He wasn't interested in sex. He wasn't interested in money. He didn't have a big car. He didn't do sneaky little double takes and despise people over their shoulders. He was innocent himself. He was uncorrupted. That is, of course, is a fantasy of mine, also a very wide fantasy in the minds of other people, to actually recapture the innocence of childhood. And so, therefore, yes, I did think he was rather godlike. And honestly, it really got to me, you know. I mean, some people thought, and quite rightly, I think, that I did behave preposterously when I was Doctor Who. I mean, after off the set, when I met children, or when I went to schools or hospitals and things like that, where I witnessed some amazing things in that the power of a fictional character like the Doctor. I was invited to the bedsides of dying children, and parents were very grateful. And I was very humble at what I saw. And therefore this character of the Doctor got to me a lot, and I wouldn't tolerate what I considered any kind of adult or disappointing behavior. No shouting. I used to always sit down if the children were small. I wouldn't, of course, allow any bad language. I wouldn't allow any smoking of cigarettes or drunkenness, and was never seen myself drinking if I could possibly avoid it, or eating. I felt somehow that the Doctor should remain enigmatic and not like any other
he or you seem to have brought quite a lot of magic into the lives of the fans. Do you enjoy the effect you have on the fans?
Do I enjoy the effect I have on the fans? God, I tell you something. I enjoy the effect the fans have on me. I really do. I mean, the fans are the source of my energy. The fans revitalize me. The fans fill me with optimism. The fans keep the demons of depression and anxiety at bay. The fans fill me with hope. Now, of course, people say there's Tom Baker crawling to the fans again. No, I say this very solemnly. Absolutely solemnly. And I would justify it in this way. I am convinced. I'm convinced of lots of things. And perhaps I'm most emphatic about the things I know least about, but I can't help that. I am convinced that what is wrong in a lot of people's lives is they don't get enough affection, they don't get enough attention, they are not made to feel special enough. You know my views about the idea of working people coming home and the family turning to and applauding them on a Thursday night outside in the street. I'd like to see a whole street applauding at 5 o'clock if everyone came home from work with the paycheck. I'd like to see women who cook so patiently for their families applauded afterwards. I'd like to see images of women coming out of the kitchen and all the family applauding. Bravo, bravo, ma'am, bravo! And mother taking lots of bows and being very, and everyone being proud of her. If we got lots and lots of rounds of applause, if we applauded, of course I'm now betraying my impractical streak, if we applauded bus conductors or bus drivers and said, very good, Roger, very good, a great journey, very good on the corner of Tottenham Court Road there. Well done, kid. If we applauded doctors that give us some attention, we would inspire them. Applause inspires. So I'm grateful to the fans because they applaud me. And they applaud me when you know there isn't always things to applaud. Even when I'm in the doldrums, even when I'm in the troughs, and no one wants me, then suddenly, click, click, through the door come several letters or bundles of letters.
So what will happen one day when there are no more fans?
I can't imagine life without fans. So when the fans run out, the fans of the Doctor run out, and the fans of Tom Baker run out, then what we're talking about is when there's no more love left. And when there's no love left, then there's nothing left. And I'll be nothing then.
It's said that sometimes, at work I mean, that you were sometimes very moody and even aggressive. Is that a fair comment, do you think?
Yes, I think that there is some truth in the fact that I was aggressive at work, yes. But that it springs, I think, like a great deal of aggression in people. I'm not very exceptional in that way. It sprang from anxiety. I used to be very aggressive if I thought that people weren't taking it as serious as I was. Of course, sometimes I was mistaken. I was sometimes too serious, and sometimes I used to demand a degree of commitment which was preposterous. And sometimes I'm afraid I was guilty of being very, very impatient and, you could say, aggressive and rude to people. I sometimes hear people say years later, "You were very rude to me, Tom." A director once met me years afterwards and he said, "You gave me a hard time, Tom Baker." And I had to say, I didn't mean to give you a hard time. I mean, conversely, some directors gave me a hard time and I've forgiven them, although I haven't forgotten them. As for moody, yes, I think I think I was moody. I think I am rather a moody person. I'm easily thrown off balance, really. I get excited and want to achieve something, and I want people to agree with me. I want to inspire people and make them laugh. I don't want to have to explain my poor jokes, such as they are. And when, of course, I'm pushed down, as I often am and often deserve to be, I'm not all that resilient, really. I mean, I don't bounce instantly. I'm sorry to say. Not like the Doctor at all.
And is this a side of you that the fans never see?
Well, yes, of course it's a side of me that the fans never see. Curiously enough, I sometimes think that when I'm out in London, for example, this was rather more acute a few years ago. You know, when I was talking earlier about the omnipresence of God, God is everywhere, for people who don't know what omnipresence meant. I mean, I only know that word because it was hammered into me. But the omnipresence of God, which used to make me so self-conscious as a child, you see, I couldn't conceive of the fact that when I was taking my trousers off, or something like that, or when I was washing myself, or standing up naked in the bath, I couldn't conceive of God looking discreetly out of the window while my little Winky was wiggling in the draft. There must have been a draft in my house. So I used to think of God watching me all the time. This produced a degree of neurosis. But when the side you talk about, the fans not seeing of me, when I was Doctor Who and used to walk in London as Tom Baker in civilian dress, in suits or evening dress sometimes, or whatever it is, I always was so self-conscious of the fact that I played the Doctor and that he was fine and brave and noble. Now this is really, will get me some stick in the Coach and Horses in Soho. I used to actually sometimes walk as if I were very happy and determined. And if people approached me, really scabby, leprous dropouts would approach me. I mean, I didn't mind the first or the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth. But when it used to get to the 13th scabby dropout, with the same lousy standard of begging, that's another thing that's actually declined in our civilization. The standard of begging has sadly gone right down. Beggars are not inventive anymore, you know. Now, I mean, beggars ask you for 25p for a cup of coffee. I mean, I long to be stopped by a beggar who'll say, "Excuse me, Governor, could you let me have 12 quid for a bottle of champagne?" That would absolutely lift me, and I'd say, "Look, I tell you what, I won't give you 12 quid, but I'll give you 2 quid, and ask the next gent." And so on. And the beggar could live on champagne. I don't know why the standard of begging has gone down. It's much higher in Ireland, more inventive in Ireland, and much funnier. But this fan thing, to get back to it, so I used to walk as if I were the Doctor. Of course I would be anxious sometimes. I wouldn't show it. And these people would come and beg off me, the 13th, and I would think, what would the Doctor do? The Doctor would be gracious and nice, and therefore, although it wasn't perhaps honest in motivation, it helped me to get through the days. And sometimes, you know, the most amazing things would happen. I'd sometimes be walking along the street, and I'd see a man lying there with 2 cans, empty Carlsberg Special cans there, you know, that strong beer that down and outs drink, and I don't blame them. And you'd hear people doing comments on them, possibly the greatest lager in the world. And sometimes these fellows say, could you spare the price of a Carlsberg Special, Your Honour, or whatever it was. And I'd remember, I think, what the Doctor would say, and I'd say, no, I can't spare the price of 1 Carlsberg Special. However, on consideration, I'll spare you the price of 3, and a packet of cigarettes. I thought the Doctor would have done that. He would have been sympathetic. And so I'd do that. And, you know, sometimes, I don't know where they saw it, not often, sometimes they'd say, as I was walking away, I'm afraid sometimes feeling rather smug, and guilty for feeling smug, I'd hear someone say, it's amazing if they say, "God bless you, Doctor, God bless you." So I never really knew whether this fellow was actually watching television, whether he was down and out, or whether in fact he was an actor researching a part, or maybe he was an actor in a play, and I'd walked into a scene. Of course, as I was behaving like the Doctor, I used to be very detached about that and just walk clean out of the scene. But I wanted actually to wrench you back to my comment about the fans, I think, about how they see me and how I see them. Of course, I see them through the same rose-tinted spectacles. I don't see my fans at their worst, at their ordinary, in their state of anxiety. When I see them, they're happy. When they see me, I'm happy. But there are pictures around here of me as an actor in various parts, and there are 1 or 2 paintings that I've kept from fans. And it will give you some idea of how admiration and affection colors perception. Now, here is an example of blind love. This picture was painted of me by a wonderful fan called Tiny Ryan in Chicago a few years ago. One July day, I was in Chicago and volunteered to go down and be greeted by the fans. And a sweaty Tom Baker kissed 2,669 sweaty women in a line. And in that line was Tiny Ryan. She didn't kiss me. She just shook hands and gave me this charming, charming painting. But I don't look like that. I never looked like that. I never looked as pleasant as that, but she thought I did. Later, of course, she saw me a bit more clearly. Come and have a look at this one. Tiny Ryan begins to see some reality. Can you see the fatigue and the disappointment and the demons behind those eyes? I rather like this one better. And she was plainly seeing me being rather tired and the beginning of disintegration. So I bought an anti-disintegration machine. This bicycle, sir, will definitely prevent disintegration. So I paid out £150 and set out on the road back to youth. Or balls, of course. But never mind. We all need our delusions. Anyway, these are the roads I pedal to keep fit. Down the hill to the pub. The Hunchback and Ferret. Hardly sounds real, does it? Deep breaths. Oh, the pain. Never mind. Think of Jane Fonda. That's no help. Don't think at all. That's the trick. But the bloody thoughts will keep coming.
Didn't that used to be Tom Baker?
No, he's dead.
Oh, of course he is.
My name is Captain Flint. I'm a parrot and very ambitious.
Yes, I see from your letter that you're convinced you'll be very good for the part. Most actors say that, actually. Yes, good. Well, a few questions, if you don't mind. Age?
Mind your own bloody business.
Married?
I'm queer.
Really?
Very queer.
Really? Any children?
Get a grip. Get a
Well,
grip.
I'm sorry about that, but it's not obvious, is it?
No, but
Now,
you
just
are.
let me tell you something about the play. It's called Treasure Island.
Never heard of it.
Now, you might say it's about a parrot. Most people would say it's an adventure story about greed.
Greed!
Now,
I know everything about greed.
Thank you.
L-O-V-E, greed.
thank you. Yes, thank you, yes. Now, the character you play is called Captain Flint. That's right, yes, after the great pirate, Captain Flint. And you have most of your scenes with Long John Silver.
Long John Silver. Oh.
That's right.
Oh, my luck's in.
Long John Silver.
Long John Silver. No,
That's
don't
it,
tell me.
the
Don't tell me.
one-legged seaman.
Universal Films.
Yes.
Robert Newton.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I know. Robert Newton played him in the film.
Ah,
Yes,
Jim,
he's no common or garden parrot.
No, I'm not.
You have some wonderful lines, yes, of course you... Ow! Of course you do. Pieces of 8? Yes, pieces of 8. And hang high the roof beams carpenter. Can you say that?
J.D. Salinger.
Yes, very good. Well, that's a start, yes. Also, there's a death sequence. Yes, yes. Ow! I thought you'd like that, yes. You get shot. Oh! But there's a death speech.
Death speech?
What?
Death.
No, a death speech.
Oh, death.
Yeah, you get to say a dying speech. It's not very long, but it's very, very moving.
To
Look.
be or not to be? 'Tis a far, far
Well,
better... How much a week? Double it.
Well, how about £1,500 a week and all the sunflower seeds you can eat?
I'll think about it.
Good, good. Well, sign here. Is this your pen?
Very fun.
Come on, sign here. You can do it. You can do it.
I can't do anything.
But of course he won't do it, will he? When the Mermaid Theatre... Ow! When the Mermaid... Excuse me. When the Mermaid Theatre asked me to play Long John Silver, I laid down some strict rules. I had to have some say
Get on with it.
casting.
Get on with
I want
it.
the emphasis on the greed and the
It's not
vanity
mad.
stressed very
But
much.
it's how that
I want
is.
the social divisions pointed out so that everybody understood it without greed. And finally, of course, they said yes, yes to everything, even to the casting. And so I started with my friend the parrot. Well, there's no need to go that far. Come on, come on,
Give the kiss.
Come
Give
on.
the kiss.
come on, come on. Anyway, what happened was, I could have had the job, 12 performances a week,
I like it. What?
Several £100
I like
that
it.
my
What?
pal the parrot wouldn't sign, as you can see. And I thought, well, if he won't sign, I'll follow the parrot.
Give it up.
And I never did do
Talk.
it. Never did
Let's
do
go
it.
for a glass of beer.
I never did do it.
A glass of beer. Friendly.
So I see myself now, growing old with my old friend, the parrot, Captain Flint.
What do you mean?
Eh?
What do you mean growing old? You are old. Let's go for a pint of Fremlins.
A pint of what?
Fremlins.
Fremlins?
Yeah.
He's been listening to gossip. A pint of parrots don't drink Fremlins.
Let's find out.
The next thing you'll be asking for... What?
Lord Bloody Mary!
God, stop.
No, I won't stop. Bloody Mary. Bloody
What?
Mary doesn't know what Bloody Mary is.
Come on. Aren't you a beauty?
Something
Now,
like that.
tell me something about your background.
I never been to school.
Have you had a lot of experience?
Never.
Joint stock, rolling stock,
Kiss
summer
me,
stock,
honey!
repertory?
I was at
Come on.
Trafalgar, you know. Oh, lots of parrots were there. The place was crawling with bloody parrots.
Come to school, 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 come to school. Come on! Come on, you're late! Come on! I hear you're in a monastery. Is that true? Yes, it is true, yes. When I was a child, I wanted to do something heroic and amazing. I think most children feel this. But you're asking me how it happened. And I was passionate to do something extraordinary in order to get away from the paralyzingly boring pattern that was unfolding before me in Liverpool. Now, the only way that poor children can change their lives is through education. We know that. I'm terrific at these kind of commonplaces. And as I wasn't a very bright child, and didn't turn out to be a very bright adult either, I had to discover another escape route from the annihilating fear of boredom. And wherever you look, in any country, in any culture, poor children have one escape route which is unarguable. It's not an opinion, it is unarguable. They have one spectacular, honorable escape route from their poverty, and that is religion. They must become professionally religious. And that's what I did. One day in school, a man came and he made a marvelous speech about heroism. And he said that he was looking for heroes. He was looking for people who were interested in moral perfection. When I think about the phrase, moral perfection, like that. And at the end of this inspiring speech about looking for heroes, I put my hand up. Of course, I realize now that if he'd been recruiting for the Foreign Legion, I'd have put my hand up. I'd have put my hand up for anything to get out of Liverpool. But it was to go to a monastery. Did you really have thoughts of moral perfection at that age? Well, you know, it's incredible, isn't it? I say moral perfection, and you asked me that reasonable question. Yes, I'm afraid I bloody well did have thoughts of moral perfection. It was hammered into my poor head. I mean, I had thoughts. I used to make novenas, 9-day prayers, that is, for death. You know, before I was in my teens, I couldn't wait to get to the bosom, to Abraham's bosom, as Shakespeare described, going to God. I couldn't wait, actually, to starve myself or die of thirst or wear a hair shirt or make sacrifices, because I was caught up in this wonderful, dramatic fantasy and the divine paradoxes, of course, of Christianity, which is the only religion I really know about. The divine paradoxes of Christianity, which thrilled people, little boys like me, with vivid imaginations and perhaps not very bright. Not very bright now. Vivid paradoxes like, blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And someone rather sarcastically remarked It'll be interesting to see how long the meek hold on to the earth when they've inherited it. But this blessedness in paradox, blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice. This, of course, is the wonderful thing about religion, in that it justifies the ghastliness of one's existence. Religion in all countries explains why the poor are in the gutter. It's a brilliant operation.
So did you feel you were escaping from something?
Of course. Everyone who does anything passionate thinks that they're escaping from one thing to another, whether it's the infatuation, with an intellectual idea, whether it's an infatuation with another person, whether it's being newly converted to something. Yes, I thought I was escaping from the drabness of being an uneducated Liverpool boy into the glory and excitement of being a potential martyr. I mean, I didn't want to mess around, you know.
And did it turn out like that, the glory of the potential martyr?
I left eventually, after I'd been here nearly 6 years or a bit more, 6 years, I think. And I left because it dawned on me that something awful was going on, that I wasn't happy there, that I couldn't fit in. I have a kind of cramped energy about me. And when that cramped energy begins to manifest itself in my being awkward and unhappy, then I realize that I must examine why I'm doing something.
You're thought of as being a very gregarious sort of fellow. I mean, did the silence in the monastery, did that bother you?
Well, it wasn't really the silence or anything else, in the sense of it being unfriendly or something. I just thought of those heroic demands, about fraternal love, silence, self-sacrifice, moral perfection, chastity, obedience, and poverty. I mean, lots of these things, of course, I was already familiar with. It didn't strike me that they were matters of abnegation. They struck me as being heroic things. It is, of course, true that I am gregarious, and it's... Actually, I am capable of being silent. I still have a very, very strong desire to spend, in the average day, a significant amount of time alone. I don't like actually being on the inside table in a restaurant or the inside seat in a train.
Do you regard your leaving the monastery as a failure?
Well, I did regard it at one time as a failure. Now I don't really consider things so much as failures as, setbacks or defeats or experiences one goes through, ordeals that one survives. But there is a kind of nagging little pain that, yes, it was a failure. Yeah, it was some sort of failure. I mean, it's just a splendid ideal, isn't it? Self-sacrifice, service, silence, and all those sort of things. And it didn't work out for me.
And have you changed?
Oh, yes, I've changed, yes. I mean, I really do think that if one didn't believe in the possibility of change, life would be intolerable. It's for that reason that Hello, Oliver. It's for that reason that I love certain writers. The New Testament, of course, which is one of my favorite pieces of reading, is about the possibility of change. It's about the possibility of being a thief on a cross and that very day being in paradise. I suppose if one reads Rousseau, a writer just of ideas, he believes in the perfectibility of man. Dickens certainly believes in redemption.
Scrooge knew he was dead.
Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he had been partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assigned, his sole residuary legatee.
his sole friend, his sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it yet stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, scraping, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped Scrooge in the street to say, with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars asked him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him. And when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways or up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than the evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. My dear friends, it's taken almost 10 hours to do this. I have spent 10 hours trying to amuse and divert you and tell you something about myself. And here we are, in the last shot, and I'm going to have a glass of wine and think about the past 10 hours, and of course hope that what we've done will divert and amuse you. And dare one hope, give you some idea of what I really felt about you all those years in return for what you've done for me. Now, I'll tell you something. That wine is so extraordinary, I'm going to pour myself another glass. And then, if I'm allowed one more fantasy, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could actually ask you to come here and sit down and eat bread and drink wine with me? Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could ask you to come here and sit down and drink a glass of wine and eat some bread with me, a piece of cheese? And I could try even harder to make you laugh. And I could try, perhaps more convincingly, to demonstrate that I am grateful and that it all was such fun. And that by and large, if you'll pardon that amazing expression, it goes on being fun. And maybe the fans won't die away,
as one of my interrogators suggested so frighteningly a little while ago, that they would. Perhaps you won't. And if you won't, then I won't. We'll both stay. Good health. Thank you. Heaven.
That is why we will rule the galaxy.
Loose thinking. The trouble with Cybermen is that they've got hydraulic muscles. And, of course, hydraulic brains to go with them. Now, I want some information from you, Cyber Leader.
And I'm sure you got it. Hello.
Yes, I did. Hello.
And it seems like that, as you said, make you very big in Abu Dhabi.
Yes, that's right.
And around the world.
Oh, and around the world,
And
yeah.
around the world.
They just did another Doctor Who, which bombed, didn't it? An American co-production. Didn't work. Didn't work at all. Did it?
I didn't watch it.
No, I didn't.
But I understand it was amazingly dull and ordinary.
Yeah, which is one thing Doctor Who never was.
No, apparently it wasn't very mysterious, and so we've heard the last of it, I'm afraid.
It's a shame.
That's a shame.
Well, I don't
Great
feel very
story.
grieved about it.
We've had enough. We've had enough.
Absolutely. You were working on a building site, weren't you, when they offered you
I
the
was.
part?
Yes, I would work anywhere, really. I'm quite shameless in that way, yes. But that was a long time ago, you know.
I know.
Yeah.
How old were you when it fell
I
your
suppose
way?
I was still in my 30s. I
Yeah.
suppose I was about 37.
And you still, I like this, you have the grace to say, so many people turn their backs on something which has been a huge success for them, but you have the grace to say that actually it was your favourite part. It was just such fun.
Well, it was, because, you know, I always wanted to be a great success in something. Initially, when I was young, I wanted to be a martyr, but I saw through that.
I thought you wanted to be an orphan, didn't you?
Well, I wanted to be an orphan, but when that didn't happen, I wanted to, because the Germans didn't bomb my mother. But then I wanted to be a martyr, and then I took up this long, passionate fling with God. And for a while, I thought we were going to, you know, we were an item, God and I. But then, you know, I went off him, really.
But did you go? I mean, obviously you were in a monastery and you came out again, but have you still got a faith? Would you still describe yourself as a Christian?
Well, no, I couldn't describe myself as a Christian, but I mean, I do read my Bible, but that's because I love, you know, cheap, lurid melodrama. You know, I read the Old Testament, and it really does actually slay me, you know, because we got off to a very bad start, you know, in the Garden of Eden. I mean, the firstborn man, as you know, was a murderer, killed his brother. And I was reading Genesis the other day. Do you know that God was sick of us by chapter 7? Well, that's when he first committed genocide. It was. He said to Noah, get in the ark. And Noah said, well, he said, just get in the ark. I'm going to drown the rest of the buggers. And he did.
You'll come back to me in the end, though, won't you, Tom? Yeah?
I don't know, really. I'm not all that clever, but maybe he'll come back to me.
I'll tap you on the shoulder one day.
Yes, you say hello.
Yeah.
No, but you wanted to be an orphan, didn't you? Because during the war, orphans got American packages.
Yes. Orphans got baseball caps.
That's right, and Superman comics and stuff.
Yes, yeah. And so lots of us wanted to be orphans. And we used to go to church and pray that our mothers would be bombed on the way back from the pub, yes.
Horrible.
I thought it was rather nice, although I was devoted to my mother, but I did want to be an orphan.
Yeah. This is just a live, talky sort of flavour of the flavour of your book, Who on Earth, Tom Baker, which has been serialised in one of the papers, so we've had a chance to read it. It's very moving in parts. I mean, you say that when your father came back from the war, and how long had he been overseas for? How long had he not seen your mother for? Ages.
Well, a long time, a couple of years maybe a bit more.
And when he arrived home and emptied his kit bag,
my mother,
you tell me.
when my mother unravelled his dobie, his washing, as they used to say in those days, she found 2 years' letters unopened.
From her?
From her. She'd written to him every fortnight for 2 years.
Yeah.
And he'd never opened them. That's right. Yeah.
How extraordinary.
It was extraordinary, yes.
Why? Do you think could it have been that he couldn't bear to be reminded of home, or?
No, I think he was just bone idle. He was an odd fellow. I mean, at least he could have slit them, couldn't he? Yeah. And she might have thought he'd read them.
But it seems odd that he brought them home, you see. That's why I think...
that's right. He really wasn't all that clever. I mean, he should have dumped them over the side. He'd been around the world twice.
But they then didn't speak to each other, did they?
She didn't speak to him again.
She didn't speak to him ever again?
No. Not for 9 years.
Good God, but they didn't separate. They didn't
No,
split
they
up.
had nowhere to go, you see. And also, he didn't have a suitcase to take his things away. He was very poor, you know. Lots of the poor would stay together because they were too poor to part, really.
Yes.
And so then came the great drama of their lives, was how subtle and refined their methods of torturing each other could be. Like lots of people who want to stay together, they refine their torture of each other.
Yes.
And
were you a go-between if they weren't talking?
well, I was a go-between, but it was in an absurd way, because if he asked me to ask my mother what was for dinner, she was there. You know, so it was a bit of a black farce, really. So
you literally then turned around.
So she'd say, ask him what he wants for his supper. And he heard that. So I'd say, she wants to know what you want for your supper. And he'd say, ask her what she's got. And I'd say, he wants to know what you've got. And she'd say, liver and onions. And he'd say, tell her I hate it. It was dire.
Especially when they had a row, because you would have been the conduit of the argument as well.
Yeah, but mind you, I wasn't a child when that was happening.
No,
I was already a student and a student actor. So it wasn't bad. And also, you know, when you're an actor, you watch these things, and I thought, you know, maybe one day I'll be able to play him. And then I realized, no, it's such an awful part. I'd much rather play my mother, which is very likely nowadays.
So you weren't wounded by that?
Well, I mean, I hope I haven't given the impression that I was wounded, but
no.
I was sad for them, you know. I was sad that I remember when my mother was dying, and my father and mother died within a fortnight of each other, and when my mother was so ill that her hands were too wasted and sore to touch the counterpane, and I said, full of guilt and carting down a box of chocolates, hard centres, I suppose, knowing my lack of tact, and I said, is there anything you want? And she said, yes. I just want to outlive that old goat in the next room.
Jeez.
And she didn't, you know. And then when my brother went to see my father and told him the terrible news about my mother's death, he wept, you know, the tears, the wasted tears of 34 years or something. Wasted,
God.
Yeah.
It's one of the saddest stories I've ever heard.
Oh, no, but if you turn over, you know, I cheer up on the next page. You did ask me a sad one.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. What's the story, though, the fascinating story of how you met someone in a restaurant and talked to him for 2 hours and discovered that he was your son?
Yeah, I was in New Zealand a few months ago, and my wife and I were having a most marvellous dinner on the harbour side. And we were very happy that night. And when it came to pay the bill, the man said, it's all right, sir, it's been taken care of. And I said to my wife, you watch, it's some nutty Doctor Who fan who insists on it. And no one ever pays a bill, do they, without wanting to see you? Because, I mean, that really is self-sacrifice. You know, they always want...
no one's ever
they won't do that. Well, lots of people have paid my bill. Lots of people, but they always want to put their tongues down my throat or something like that, you know, because, especially if they're anthropologists.
They get their dinner back, obviously.
They sometimes do it with torches. Anyway, so the man said, your dinner's been paid. I said, no, I'd rather pay my own dinner. He said, no, it's in the till, sir, it's paid. So I said to my wife, come on, let's go in then. So they said, this man's a fan of yours. And when we went in this marvellous light, sharp light coming in, beautiful restaurant, much more informal than ours. And there was this very good-looking big man and looking at me rather quizzically. And so, you know, when you're an actor, often people, you know, send for me or know something about me or have seen my performances and therefore want to shoot me or something. And I said, I said to him, is your name Morgan by any chance? You always say that. Journalists would say that. Yeah. You don't want to be on. He said, no, my name's Baker, Piers Baker. I'm your son.
Good God.
There he is.
Yeah.
He is
so I said, there he is. So I said, naturally, I said, how do you do? And he ordered us a beer, and it's been fine. The other day we watched the Grand Prix together.
Fantastic. How long had you been apart for?
Well, I hadn't seen him, I think, I can't remember, it was a long time, if I didn't recognize him. About 16 years, maybe.
That long?
Yeah, but he works all around the world, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And are you now an item?
Yes, we are, yes. Excellent. He came, and he actually rang me up last night. Yeah, I'm going to see him, because I'm just off on a book tour, 50 towns and cities. Because I don't want to miss any. I'm going to actually do evening signings in people's houses, you know, at hospitals, outpatients, schools, anywhere.
Good stuff.
Shamelessly.
No, it's good.
There are 1,000 stories in the book. We've just taken 3 there, talking about it, to give it a flavour. What we haven't covered is your 3 marriages. I just wanted to ask you one question about them. Are you the sort of person that looks back and says, well, because 2 of them didn't work out, and the present one does very much, I'd rather just have had this one going back to the beginning? Or actually, have you been enriched by by all the...
Oh, yes, I think so. Yes, I've been enriched, really, especially I've been enriched by my poverty. I mean, that's one of the paradoxes. Yes, on the way. I mean, that's why, in a sense, I call the book rather ironically and teasingly, Who on Earth is Tom Baker? Because, you know, sometimes I haven't always known. But no, I have no regrets about the other managers. You know, they were okay, and then they weren't okay, and so one pushes on.
Yeah. Well, it's a great book. Thank you very much for coming and talking about it. Good luck with the tour in the outpatients departments and people's private kitchens and all of that.
You know, we had at least a couple of other clips to play from Doctor Who, and you were so interesting that we forgot about them.
I already feel the presence of not only Tom but Doctor Who here. Please take a pew, Mr. Who. Now, as of yesterday, Tom, this is quite extraordinary. They're lovely. They're harmless. They're lovely. As of yesterday, you've become the voice of BT, let me get this right, text messaging. Now, how exactly, tell us this poor mortal, how does this work?
Well, a new step has been taken scientifically. Now, if you use BT text processing, I recorded for about 70 hours also millions and millions of sounds that are broken down, not just words, although I had to read lots of words. But it means now that anyone who uses that texting thing, when they send a message over which I have no control, I don't know what they're going to be saying, they can make me say anything they want. It's true. Now, not long ago, I had a phone call from my wife, which gave me a terrible joke, because you don't expect to get calls from your wife. She said, darling, thank you very much for that sweet message. I thought, strange. I said, really? She said, yes, I love that bit when you talked about Jack Nicholson and said that you felt more alive when you thought about me. And I said, but I didn't send you a message. I hadn't sent her a message. A friend of mine had texted this message.
Which was your voice?
And it was my voice.
Well, we're going to hear some examples of that in a moment. Why do you think they chose your voice? I mean, it's certainly very distinguished.
Oh, is it distinguished?
It's the fourth most recognisable voice, apparently, behind the Queen, Tony Blair, and Mrs. Thatcher. That's what
I believe they were all offered the job, but they were busy. But I think I was chosen because of Little Britain, wasn't I?
Yes.
I mean, Little Britain has kind of reinvented me.
Well, you do the voice over that, the announcer's voice, isn't it?
I do all the continuity gag, and I fire off terrible insults, you know.
Are you allowed to have input there? Now, is it not?
Oh, no. Not on it's a family show, really. But I'm allowed, I make the boys laugh. The boys, you see, I'm now employed by the children who watched me when I was Doctor Who. And so... now they're in show business.
So those two guys...
when they were children, they sat on my knee, and now they're giving me a job, yes.
I don't imagine how much of this I should believe with Tom. You never know what he's winding you up. How do you send, this new system, because you said God knows how many hours, you've actually recorded almost every word in the English language.
Well, no, not every word, every sound. You see, the sound, it's broken down into, phonemes or... little fragments, so that they can actually get that spontaneous or pretty spontaneous thing in it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I was recording thousands and thousands of sentences which didn't make sense but contained sounds. Do you want an example?
Yeah, go for it.
So I would say, for example, I would have to read... Molly was complaining to her sister because she's just discovered that her lover has a wooden leg. And as he's 6'3", this makes him rather rigid in bed. She's asked him to remove his leg, but he says it makes him unbalanced. And Molly doesn't know what to do because she finds that his leg is coming between them. Now, it's very kind of you to laugh. That was a very serious thing.
You have to send that and word it.
I have to say that, but that contains, you see, 87... small sound.
Break down and make it into different sentences. What about when people do kiss at the end of the sentence?
Well, I was doing a lot. Well, I did sobbing, sighing, whimpering, and squealing. Yeah.
So
but no extra charge.
So they go on on the message.
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you sort of regretting that you've got involved in this a little bit? Because you don't know what the messages are going to be sent. Somebody could be asking somebody to marry them.
Yeah.
All with your voice. It's quite
Well, they
extraordinary.
could, yes, and I hope they will, because I think that might liven things up a bit.
I think people are more likely to say yes if they hear your wonderful tone.
No, but they won't know. I won't know what they're saying, will it? I won't know what
but the people getting the messages, it will be your
voice.
After the break, when we come back, we're going to send you a message. We're going to see what it sounds like in here. Very briefly, I mean, if someone wants to send a message where there's a swear word in it, what do you do then?
They can make them.
They can say anything, because the sounds are there. I didn't say swear words. I didn't say words like...
Oh, God.
We were just discussing in the break there, how did you feel when you got that first call from the Little Britain people? Were you sort of, surprised to be the narrator?
Well, because they were young, it's always inspiring to be asked, because I remember the days when I was known by young people. And that was wonderful. Now, where I live, not long ago, I was standing outside a shop, a very smart shop, and I saw the man waving. And I waved at him. I thought perhaps he wanted some advice or something like that. Or perhaps, some attention. And I said, and I waved like that, and he went, and so I did that like that, and he went. So I looked over my shoulder, and he said, and I said, why? And he said, image. And he moved me. I thought, Christ, man, you wouldn't have dared do that 50 years ago. And of course he wouldn't. He didn't know me anymore. He didn't know me anymore. Absolutely incredible,
But when you did get that call from Little Britain, it wasn't a hit show when you first got that call.
No, it wasn't.
The narrative, the script is so obscure. The things that you have to say are so crazy. How easy was it to say, yeah, I'll go with this, I'll run with this and see what happens with it?
It was very easy.
You had an instinct that it was going to be brilliant.
I had nothing else to do,
Oh.
No, I didn't. I know that's very pathetic.
But you've always done voices.
Well, I've done voices and everything like that, but I only really feel alive, if I'm talking to people or to myself sometimes in sad moments, and the people are laughing. That's what we do.
What about that continuity announced on the BBC? Now, not many actors get offered to do that. Did you have any input in that?
Well, I did have some input in that, but that was because that's another example of the producers on that all watched me. You see. Again, they were. It
has a snowball effect.
That's right, it has. Yeah.
Suddenly you're back on the scene, and the man to have and the man to see.
That's right, and people are terribly, terribly reassured.
You actually fancy maybe doing a role in Coronation Street? That would be something you'd quite like to do.
I would think Coronation Street would be the ultimate. Yes.
Why the ultimate?
Well, simply because they get such huge audiences, and I come, of course, from Liverpool, not all that far away. I would be very much at home. I'd quite like to be in Coronation Street as a kind of inept, say, transvestite.
You've got me thinking about another role you say you would love to be in. You'd like to be in The Last of the Summer Wine. Why? That's yours?
Well, for two reasons. I was working with the little lecherous man, Robert Fife. He's always on the bike after a woman. And so he said, Tom, you'd like it in Last of the Summer Wine. I said, would I? He said, yes. I said, why is that? He said, well, every afternoon, he said, we have a little sleep.
As well as being voted the fourth most recognisable voice, you've also voted, I think it was fourth again in a magazine to be the fourth most eccentric star. I mean, you were behind Bjork, Chris Eubank and David Icke. Right, and just in front of Ozzy Osbourne and John McCurrick. You were fourth.
That's a bloody disreputable crew. Actually, that whole five of them should be locked up. I don't want to be in that gang.
Does it bother you being dubbed eccentric? Because, you're not the actual norm guy. And when you walked in, you sort of did your little thing, and then you go off on these lovely little...
Well, I mean, this is the way I come into people's... Because, you see, the thing is, I'm so excited to be asked to come on here. No, let me finish. Don't start crying. Because...
You've got 30 seconds.
Right. Well, the thing is, I've been to lots of... I've never been invited back twice.
Oh, really? Oh, you
well, come back. We want you to come back.
No, you don't mean it.
Yes, you do.
Well, I was born in 1934 in Liverpool. So I was a child at the outbreak of war. My father was in the services during the whole war, and I spent my childhood not going to school very much because of the war. Liverpool was one of the cities that was bombed, and that was really about it. No achievement in education at all. None at all. And I think it was my lack of achievement in education that made me restless to try and go in some other direction, because in those days, as to some extent now, but more so in those days, the only way out for poor families was through education. And with no educational achievement, I was really hidebound and had to find some other way. My mother was very religious, and somebody came to school one day looking for heroes, asking for people who wanted to do splendid and fine things, and I put my hand up. I always wanted to do something fine and splendid, and that led me into a monastery. With movies, the first movie I ever did, I don't think it was ever released. The first movie I ever did was in the 60s sometime. It was called A Winter's Tale. It was a film of the Shakespeare play. Lawrence Harvey was the star, and I played the bear. And nothing much happened to that. But that was an accident. It was a very successful stage play that an American organization attempted to turn into a film. It didn't really work out. That's how I got started. When I got the part, there was no rush for the designs to come through, and the designer became a friend of mine, and we used to go out for weeks, about 5 or 6 weeks. We used to go out and play, dressing up in various costumiers in London at the BBC. We had access to all those places, and we used to go out and we weren't rushing it, and we used to dress up, and I used to dance about, and Jim was amused, Jim Atchison was amused, and finally emerged this sort of end of a century, slightly boho, crazy costume, which we liked. The scarf was a delicious little accident of us buying too much wool, and the lady was so excited to be working with the BBC, the lady we hired after we'd chosen the colours, knitted up all the wool. We didn't know anything about wool or knitting, and when we got to pick up the scarf, it was 20 feet long, and another little accident, and that stuck. So I did have lots of problems with the scarf. I kept falling over, or people used to think it was a tremendous wheeze to stand on my scarf when someone shouted action. And, of course, in wet weather, it used to get longer. But the BBC never left in the tripping up sequences. I regret that. I've been keen on crossword puzzles for a long time. I'm not very good at them, but I'm very enthusiastic, and I particularly like doing them with a loving friend. And one day, the Times crossword is the puzzle that everyone does in England. Not everyone, but that's the puzzle. A lot of actors do it. Actors are very good at crossword puzzles because they spend so much time standing about. And one day I was waiting for the setup, and I was actually sitting down in a country road, with the dog K9 next to me, and I was doing the Times crossword puzzle, and I knew that John Leeson, my chum who did the voiceover, was actually in a scanner wagon. And quite innocently, I said to him, "Do you think that one across is an anagram?" And John, being much cleverer and quicker than I am, answered in the voice of K9 and gave me what one across was. And then he told me about one down, and he got a quote from 12th Night or something. And a group of people standing around were simply stupefied by this. People are really very easily influenced. We should have filmed that. An awful lot of it was fun, the just process of working and helping on a bit on the script, trying to make the script work. I was the weekly reference point for the new directors. So it was all fun being Doctor Who. I think that the one thing that I miss about it, not here actually, because to some extent it still holds here, but in the United Kingdom, where I'm beginning to be forgotten, which doesn't grieve me, that's the way it goes, sometimes you're something popular. The sweetest thing of all was that for a period of 5 years or so, I was maybe the only man in England that don't talk to strange men didn't apply to. I had a marvelous instant intimacy with small children, which probably will never happen to me again. That was the sweetest thing. Actors have to grit their teeth, and you can't sit on a success. You've got to branch out somewhere else. It's not like being an accountant or something like that, where you rise in the corporation and get to the top that way. You can only get to the top as an actor, as a performer, by branching out. You can't play safe. The minute you play safe, you're taking the terrible risk that finally you'll fall into that sort of vacuum of safety, and away will go your nerve or your desire for insecurity. I think there's an incipient desire to be insecure in every performer, really. Doctor Who screenplay is just in abeyance in an office in London because we never did raise the money, and nobody was impressed with the screenplay except me, which disappointed me. I collaborated with a friend of mine to do a children's film called Operation Charlie Boy, which I brought to America, but I didn't suppose I'd have time to show it to anyone. It was about children making a stance against pollution, and I thought it was funny and grotesque, and no one else seems all that impressed, but never mind. Something might happen to. Well, I went straight from Doctor Who to play Oscar Wilde at the Chichester Festival in England, which is a big cultural event. And the trials of Oscar Wilde, it wasn't really a play so much as a theatrical adaptation made from transcripts of the trial. That was something of a success, actually. We could have taken it into the West End, but it didn't please me enough to do that. And then I went from that to something I've often wanted to do, which is to play Long John Silver in Treasure Island. That was fun. That went quite well, too. Then I did Judge Brack in Hedda Gabler. That was the first Ibsen I'd ever played. That was a failure, actually. Although I escaped by the skin of my teeth, by my sheer effrontery, I suppose. Playing Judge Brack is a good part. But the production was considered a failure, and we closed early. And then I did Sherlock Holmes for the BBC. And then latterly, at the end of last year, I've toured for about 20 weeks with the Royal Shakespeare Company in a contemporary play by Willie Russell called Educating Rita, which has just been filmed, I believe, with Michael Caine and Julie Walters. And that was fun in the provinces. That was a good play, a good production, and I was working with a comet of an actress called Kate Fitzgerald. Excellent. Excellent. We did well. I don't think that I have anything original to observe about the difference between television and film, but it is obvious, isn't it, that television taking place practically by definition in a domestic context is more potent in the sense that that it happens in private, you see. While the movies happen in the dark, it really is a collective experience. It's private in the sense that you're in the dark, but you're conscious of other people. There's a formality of going out to the movies, about getting into a car or paying at the cash desk. When you're watching something on television, the extraordinary thing is there are so many other things going on sometimes, so that maybe therefore a particular moment isn't potent, but I mean, you can listen to television in your own home without any clothes on, when you're totally drunk or drugged, or making love, or washing dishes, or having a row, or discussing a marriage settlement. And I think also at certain times, because it happens in the privacy of one's own home, I think frequently one watches television, one's critical faculties are slightly lowered, and therefore it can penetrate you. See, the formality of going out to a doctor or to the cinema or to the theatre strengthens your resolve slightly. I don't mean by that it makes you incapable of being moved or touched, by no means. But when one is alone, television gets to an awful lot of isolated and lonely people, a lot of unhappy people, and a lot of people who are tired. And it's very penetrating and insidious. I sometimes found myself being quite touched at something, and I have to blink and pull myself together and say, this is absolute rubbish, you know. It is subverting me. And then I go out and have a drink and get subverted in some other way. CBS and an Italian company called Re Productions are doing an 8-hour television film on Christopher Columbus. And I am being considered for that. Apparently I'm being hotly considered for it. And I go back
next week. I go to Los Angeles next week and then on back to England to meet these people, I think on the 8th or 9th. And then they'll show me the script. I'm extremely skeptical, actually, that they'll get out a good script on Christopher Columbus. It's a hard subject to realize. A lot of stuff is hearsay or it's just letters or whatever. It'll be really hard to get away from the sort of wooden costume pieces which so predominate when they attempt those subjects in film or television. It's hard, really, to get the conflict, the anxiety of Columbus. But if it's decent, even if it's halfway decent, I don't mind giving it a go. It'll take a long time, though. It'll take about 8 months to film. That would be my first co-production, yes. Yeah. No. Never been asked. Mind you, had I been asked, most of the stuff I've seen on American television, I'd have thrown it back in their faces.
That was part of my next question.
Oh, what? I'd rather be a journalist than do some of the stuff I see on American television. Except when I see journalists on television, then I'd sometimes rather be dead. Not much, no. I mean, I admire it in some ways. For example, the quantity and the dilemma of production of television in this country is immensely more complicated than it is in the UK. And so, to some extent, I suppose the achievement is extraordinary in a popular level. But, I mean, you're talking to me and asking me what I think. I mean, my opinion is just poor Tom Baker's opinion. No, I think most of it lamentable. But then I'm not overpowered by what we produce in the United Kingdom, and we're supposed to be the best in the world. So we tell ourselves. So I've just finished playing God.
Right.
Yeah, I usually play God these days. Sometimes I play the devil as well. I'd rather play the devil.
Do you prefer the devil in general life?
I think, actually, yes. I've only got about 2 performances. It doesn't matter. One's the devil and one's God, and I mustn't get them mixed up. But I've just come back from Czechoslovakia, where I've been in that film Dungeons and Dragons. You know that computer game?
Yeah.
And films are now being rooted in computer games. And there's this amazing $30 million movie which I was in. I played an elf. I said to this American director, he was American, so obviously he had no sense of humor. And he said, I said, I don't want to pry, boss, but and I'm glad for the job, and you're paying me in dollars, and I'm ever so grateful. But I thought elves were kind of literal. And I mean, that's what my mother told me, and she had no education at all, so I couldn't be sure that was true. He said, times have changed, Tom.
Elves ain't what they used to be.
That's right. And then when the King of the Giants walked in, he was only about 2'6", and I realized, oh, bloody world's upside down. I don't know anymore.
Are you enjoying yourself, though?
I've had a marvelous career as an actor, and I have, if I may say, being modest, I have only one gift which is very useful to me, and that is that I can enjoy any old nonsense, really.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Have you listened to our show?
You know.
Oh, you'd love it.
Would I?
Yeah,
it's any old nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can enjoy any old nonsense, really. It's a kind of necessary alchemy that people who are freelancers have to do, which everyone is learning now, since no one's in a job forever. And everyone is having to learn that, to kind of just celebrate what you've got. And so one day you'll have Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and the next day chips.
You never know what's coming next.
Yeah,
well, that's kind of part of the fun of life, isn't it? You do this, as well as, going around the world and doing various bits and bobs and being in your films, as you say. You're up to all sorts of that. I was reading about you doing something involved with the Boston Tea Party. Tell me about that.
Well, yes, I mean, that was somebody asked me would I go to America and apologize for the Boston Tea Party, which was in 1720 or something. And so I went over there and apologized to him. Unfortunately, right in the middle of my apology, which was on television, America went to war. Or declared, or started bombing someone. I've forgotten. Maybe they were probably bombing New York, knowing Americans. That's right, from a very great height. And so that wasn't a great success. But, actors, like everyone else, there's no unique group of people. Everyone has to diversify a bit now. And so I've become something of a writer. By that, I mean I'm being commissioned. So I wrote a book about me. So naturally, no one believed it. But it sold a lot of copies last year, called Who on Earth is Tom Baker? And on the strength of that, somebody asked me to write a book of my, on a subject of my choice. So I decided to write a book about a wicked child to kind of debunk this notion, that all children are wonderful and sacred and precious. And so I've written a book called The Boy Who Kicked Pigs, which apparently I read
the end scene to a group of lesbian friends of mine, and most of them were absolutely violently sick. So I think they described it as depraved, so I've got high hopes for it, and the BBC may well do something with it.
Do you like the idea of being thought of as depraved?
Well, no, I don't like the idea of being thought of as depraved. Of course, it depends on what you mean by depraved. I mean, I quite like the idea as an actor, of course, of depravity, because I'm interested in fiction. I am a fiction. And the reason for that is a wonderful paradox, isn't it? That in real life, we always want to have peaceful neighbors and loyal partners, and we want people to be honorable and gentle, and we want to have nice food, and we want to have a good time. And we want life to be calm and secure, and we want good health. Now, you couldn't write a book about that. You couldn't actually write a book or a play about happiness. I mean, if there's one thing that you cannot actually develop, it's the notion of happiness. So if you say how Frank and Judith, they got married a couple of weeks ago, they say, oh, they're very happy. Well, there's nothing much you can say about it. You say, well, should we go down and have a drink then? But if you say he left her, you say, Christ, he only married her 4 nights ago. Now you've got a story. Yeah. Or if you suddenly say, she suddenly developed a terrible attack. She thought it was eczema, but leprosy. You say, Jesus, leprosy? But she had such a marvellous complexion. And away you go. So
it's fabulous fun. I can tell that you're enjoying it, which is obviously the most... I mean, that's the secret to it, isn't it?
Well, the thing is about actors have a chance, don't they, to turn their fantasy, in other words, their imaginative life, into their work, which a lot of people don't. I mean, fantasy is the great consuming pastime of everyone in the world. Unfortunately, we don't know what other people's fantasies are unless they're quite close to us, unless they throw them at us, which would be undesirable. But with actors, you can have a fantasy, and then you get a chance to play God or the devil or whatever it is, or an elf, and you can use those fantasies up, and that becomes your profession. So in that sense, actors are a bit lucky.
This is becoming a kind of unholy trio, isn't it? God, the devil, and elves.
Yeah, well, those are the extremes, aren't they? We only want... I mean, you can't... I wouldn't want to play a saint. Although I must say, when I think about St. Francis of Assisi walking down the street, I mean, he really used to get... what he used to get off on was the sight of a leper. He was always kissing lepers.
Is that right?
And that's right.
Strange guy.
Well, it would be considered a bit odd now, wouldn't it? Say, I'm going out with this leper, and I saw you with your throat, your tongue down a leper's throat last night.
Okay, there can't be many questions that you haven't answered about Doctor Who, but obviously I'd be strung up by something if I didn't ask you the question. And the one thing that I was reading about Doctor Who was that you almost ended up strung up yourself after an episode with the famous scarf. Didn't you unravel it eventually?
Well, there's so many stories about Doctor Who and so many Doctor Whos. I haven't got it very clear in my head anymore. My memory of Doctor Who was that everything since then has been something of a disappointment because, and I don't want, this in a gooey sense to say this, but to have been, for whatever it was, 45 feature films, that's the amount I did, 179 or 189 episodes, but to have been a children's hero for all that time was an amazing experience because it opened up everything. When you're a children's hero, as Doctor Who was, and of course everyone was a great success, it opened up the entire world because, children have families or step-parents or whatever they have. And so once you've got access to children, you had access to everyone. It was simply wonderful, because it was a participatory program. So grannies loved me, you see, because on Saturday night the children used to, be cuddled by their grannies, and they'd have their head between their grannies' bosoms. And that was wonderful, and the grannies loved me for that reason. So they were lovely, charming memories, yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because they do say, don't they, when you think about James Bond, they say, Sean Connery, couldn't be anyone else. But for me, Doctor Who, Tom Baker. No. Got it. You are the Sean Connery of Doctor Who.
Thanks a lot.
It's absolutely true. But I mean, obviously, the thing is to move on from that, which you've done so well, and to be doing other things. Did it hold you back for a while?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think it still holds me back, because when you have an amazing success like that was worldwide, because we think generally in stereotypes, and because films and plays are largely cast in stereotypes, therefore, the people who are in charge of casting can't get past that image, you see. They really can't. And so, in a way, it does hold me back, because people of a certain age can only think of me as Doctor Who, and I don't blame them for that. You know, it was a good time.
Although that said, of course, there's only one thing to do, which is to get promoted out of the role, so you go from being a Time Lord to being God, as you say. So you've cracked it now.
Yeah, the thing is about God is you can't visualise God, can you really? God's great on...
look a bit like you,
well, no,
dressed in white.
God's okay on the radio, but you can't do God in vision, really.
You need the Brian Blessed kind of beard, don't you?
Well, that's if you want... yeah, but I mean, Brian Blessed always plays God, as if he's actually Captain Hook, doesn't he? And that's nice. I quite like the idea of Captain Hook as God. But,
he does a divine Captain Hook as well.
He does a marvellous Captain. He does everything.
He's coming up to Manchester as Captain Hook.
Is it really?
Actually, yeah,
yeah, he's an amazing man. He brings his own mountains with him, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, yeah.
You can't beat that, can you? Yeah. Listen, I'm so glad you're having a good time. I know that you're a busy man, so it's been lovely to catch you in the kind of off-blue room. I don't know, aquamarine, perhaps? Yes. It's certainly not a green room.
Terrific.
Whatever it is.
Actually, my eyes are getting a bit dim. Curious enough, as my eyesight gets worse, I get on much better with people. Yes, I do. I find people much more interesting than when I could see them like an eagle.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
And you.
Thanks for being part of the programme. Tom Baker.
Doctor Who was such a large chunk of your life, wasn't it?
Yes, I wasn't showing any displeasure. I'm extremely glad to have played Doctor Who, because it was something which opened up so many other things for me. It was one of the happiest periods of my life. And in one or two respects, I miss it, really. I miss the daily grind of working on those scripts at such high speed. But particularly I miss, because I'm completely anonymous now, I've had my hair cut and I'm growing a beard, nobody recognizes me anymore, which doesn't displease me at all. But the thing I really miss is that sort of instant intimacy I used to have with children. Which I think that the other fellows who've played it said the same thing as well. That was an extraordinary sensation, that being able instantly to disarm any sort of anxiety in children.
Yes, I was reading about your way with children. If they were frightened of you, you would say to them, "Haven't I seen you on the television?" Which is a lovely turnaround.
It was quite extraordinary that after a little while, when I'd met several thousand children, that none of them ever asked me a new question. I mean, they sometimes used to surprise me with their letters. You know, children would write, say, "I'm not very well today, and I've written to you and the Queen." Or perhaps the Queen and then you. I don't know what the order was. But it was just such a lovely, lovely job to do. And, of course, it's made everything else possible. You know, people are reassured by a successful series and offer one more work.
When one is well known, people do actually intrude on your life, but somehow children don't intrude in the same way, do they?
No, they don't. I used to... The mail was very strictly divided, and I didn't read all the adult letters. Lots of them were rather disturbing or, yes, odd, and sometimes painful even. But I used to look at all the mail from the children, and that was very easy and very pleasant to do. And so, finally, it came the point where, after whatever it was, I mean, I suppose that must have been 5 years' work spread over 6 and a bit years, because I did 2 series back-to-back and then had a breather. I suppose, yes, I've done the most, I think.
Yes,
and then
I think
suddenly there came a moment when I thought, well, I've done it, there's nothing else I can bring to it, and I better let someone else have a go. You see, the curious paradox of popular television, by that I mean series and serials, the curious paradox, which applies to all that area of television, is that once a thing is successful and a character has a wide appeal and is perhaps in the ratings or whatever, there can be no further development. At the same moment, the characters are frozen. So there was no fundamental difference between any of the Z-Cars characters at the beginning or the end, or the Coronation Street characters, or the Crossroads characters. They remain the same. They don't... And I think it's probably because television taking place primarily in a domestic context, people actually don't like sudden changes.
In fact, you said, I think I read somewhere, it doesn't matter who plays Doctor Who, the format's bigger than the star.
I think so, yes. I think that's absolutely true. That's not sort of false modesty. I mean, I think just given the professional expertise, anyone could do it, because the formula is wonderful. And, of course, anyway, it's unarguable, because no one has ever failed at it.
Yes.
No one.
You took the role very seriously. I mean, you've admitted you like a drink and you enjoy life, but when you were Doctor Who and you were going out to various functions and meeting children, you never smoked, you never drank, you never disappointed them, did you?
Never.
You always were Doctor Who.
Well, I mean, it's unthinkable to...
Yes.
it was a very small price to pay. I mean, my sort of flirtation with the low life of Soho actually sprang out.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
It sprang really out of the relative anonymity one could have there, because one can go to places there where there are journalists or other actors or writers or artists of some kind, and be quite secure from the prying eyes of people who might want to make something out of it, or indeed secure from the possibilities of disappointing anybody. I mean, obviously, you know, one doesn't matter how much one likes low life or carousing, one couldn't, doing the part I had, be seen plastered going down the street, because, I mean, a child would be disappointed.
You're totally reliable at work, Tom. Many people have said it, but you do have a habit of wandering off. And again, I read that if you're invited to a dinner party and you wake up that morning, you don't feel you've got anything to contribute, you don't go. I mean, is this true? Do you really?
Yes, it is. I would never dream. I get very anxious if I'm committed too far in advance. But, I mean, I would simply ring up and say I won't be there. And people would understand that. And if they didn't, well, it's unthinkable. Of course they'd understand it, because that's the way I am. Yes, I don't believe. If I go to dinner parties and meet actors or anyone else, and you say, hello, Henry, how are you? And he says, God, I'm so tired, I instantly want to kick them. Because I don't think that people should go to dinner parties when they're tired, or if they are tired when they get there, they shouldn't mention it. I really feel it's a very strong obligation wherever I go to be contributory in some way. Otherwise, I stay home. And I hide my anxieties at home.
Would you call yourself a loner? Because there was one quote, nearly everything I do is related to acting. We're professional pleasers, and that works against deep relationships.
Did I really say that?
Yes, you did. I thought it was very profound.
Yes, well, yes. Yes, I think... I'm really quite impressed that I said that. I think that there's something in that, don't you?
I do, actually.
I think, you see, that when one is totally preoccupied with oneself, which actors are, with their performances, with their appearances, with their impact on audiences, I think that kind of self-preoccupation does militate against relationships, because, of course, one is actually being utterly selfish. And therefore, actors are often really rather dull, below the level of their performances or their attitude to work, because they are obsessed with themselves. So therefore, maybe there's something...
Yes, one often finds it's a bit like a puppet in a box, that they sleep until they come alive on stage. Not all. I mean, there are some lovely actors around, but there are some who live when they're performing.
That's right, yes. There's a tremendous sort of rev-up when it comes to a performance, so that you... Sometimes, if you're in something very difficult... When I was in Hedda Gabler recently, it was so difficult to do... that thing, that I used to stay in bed most of the day, stay very quiet all day, and then go to the theatre very early, say about 4 or 3 o'clock, to get prepared for the performance. I can't just fly in and do it. I have to sort of get myself quiet and revved up for it.
I just want to finish off by saying that Hound of the Baskervilles, which is being shown in 4 episodes on BBC television, coming out in October, did you approach Holmes with a different...
I was really... I did too much work on Holmes, actually, and I wanted to do it for so long. I'm very interested in Sherlock Holmes. Actually getting to play, I suddenly realised what a monster he was, a real megalomaniac. And lots of unpleasant aspects to his personality, but nevertheless fascinating. I mean, I suppose, really, he's the forerunner of James Bond, isn't he, really, the super sleuth, the first forensic detective. Yes... I liked doing that.
Tom Baker, I liked talking to you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a police box. What on earth's he doing here? I mean, these things are usually on the street.
Because I'm a very gregarious sort of fellow. And there I was, locked in this monastery, where not only there wasn't much talking going on, which was quite difficult for me, but you weren't allowed to look at each other. You know, this was immodest. You weren't allowed to look at each other at all, so everyone walked with his head down. So naturally, there were quite a lot of injuries because people tripped over things. And they had to put up with that.
Eye contact wasn't allowed at all.
No eye contact at all. You were not allowed to look at people. No.
That's strange.
Well, you know, the same old guff, isn't the same old bollocks. You know, the eyes are the windows of the soul. And you see, if people can't talk to each other, you know, then nothing can stop people communicating. Nothing can stop them really, as long as they're, you know, you can, of course, separate by thick walls.
So how would the abbot know if a monk was unhappy without looking at his face?
Well, I think that they were allowed to look into your eyes, and they were allowed to ask you hard questions, or allowed to keep on the indoctrination of why anyone would choose this very unnatural life, you know. But the monks themselves, the young monks themselves, are not allowed to look at each other, because when people look at each other, something happens. Normally we look at each other and we smile, or we offer each other wine or something marvellous like that, but otherwise, but they didn't want that, you see, because it was part of the annihilation of the will, rather like, you know, in a brief way, like when you go in the army, they annihilate your will. When people go to drama schools, it used to be the old guff, to annihilate your personality and rebuild it in some way. So, I mean, it was just crazy way, and the other thing, it was very hard, you see, because, you know, we were very young men. I was only 15, well, by the time I was a novice, I was only 15 and a half. And so naturally I was in a state of sexual excitement at that time. I still am, when I come to think of it. Because we're all crowded together. But you know, so actually, so I was there for 6 years, and so naturally it was terrible to have a hard-on for 6 years. I mean, it was very hard to, you know, bear, very hard. And so, you know, but then everybody had a stalk, and that's why they all walked with sloops.
I wasn't wondered.
Yeah, that's
they
right.
do.
They crouch forward, otherwise their dicks rub against the roughness of the, you know, this coarse wool. Yeah, it's terrible to have a grazed head on your dick. But even that couldn't stop us. We were as stiff as skittles. An amazing time, yeah. But that was disapproved of, you see. Because, you know, we weren't allowed, when we have showers, we were showered once a week, but that was under close supervision when we, obviously there was no, look, you had to be extremely furtive to see anyone, but then you were clothed in terrible shrouds, quite clean, beautiful, coarse cotton shrouds, and then you went down a corridor with the shower operated by some demon at the end. It was a good job for him, you know, seeing all these naked bodies. Well, not naked, more interesting, you know, underneath linen things, and you washed yourself through the linen.
How bizarre.
Well, yeah, well, I suppose it is. I've given it up, of course. I'm not that conservative.
This is you couldn't gaze on another's body, I suppose.
Well, yeah, you couldn't. The idea was you couldn't even touch your own body. That's why we all had a stalk on all the time. In the showers, I remember Gilda, the fellow who was in charge of the showers, very sought after. All the perverts, you know, wanted to do the novices when they were in the shower, because you could actually, with these two wheels, actually, you know, raise the temperature to do scalding them, because you weren't allowed to scream, and they would, you know, they'd get it very hot, and then they'd get it very cold. It was kind of, you see, that kind of discipline, that kind of education that was going on in many ways in some great public schools was actually what passed for education, what passed for discipline, actually was just simply abuse.
It could be called brainwashing in some form.
Well, I mean, that's another kind of abuse. I mean, there are lots of ways of abusing people, like sarcasm, indifference, too much noise, you can kill them with kindness. There are also infinite ways of being cruel to people. There's a very lovely Elizabethan play called A Woman Killed with Kindness. So it's infinitely various. You know, we think just because of the tabloids, we think, you know, that child abuse is just the coarse abuse, you know, of pathetic paedophiles or whatever it is. When we all know, when we think about it for a few seconds, it's infinitely more subtle than that. It's very, people are able to make each other unhappy forever by infinitely subtle means, much better than beating or sexual abuse. But that's a depressing story. So there I was, locked off, swallowing all that guff, you see. And of course you can't stop falling in love because it's a natural thing. The only thing is, when you can't see anyone, it's very difficult because we look at each other. And so I had two problems because I was very affectionate. And still am, in a way. There's a story about years ago when, you know, when it was much more fun to be queer than it is now. So it's utterly commonplace. So people say, yeah, that's right. Legal now, so it's ordinary and dull. But when it wasn't...
Compulsory.
What?
Well, it's going to be compulsory soon.
Well, people should say to, you know, say to someone at drama school, is it true that, you know, the terrible incidents of homosexuality in the theatre? They say, grossly exaggerated. And you think, when will he take his hand off my knee? And it was much more fun then, you know, because there was an awful lot of cruising and despair and
And now, you know, it's just like everything else. It's just a doddle now. Isn't it? So to be queer now, well, you don't even say queer. Although in New York they want to be called queer again. But it was great when one was young, and it was all that furtiveness and cruising and buying drinks. And of course it was a very good way for the working class guardsmen, because the Queen's regiments in London were always, you know, full of male prostitutes who weren't at all queer. But they realised there was beer money if they wanted to go out with old boys who wanted to suck their dicks. And then you were always allowed, in those days, you see, the boys who went home with, especially old queers, you were always licensed in low life to steal a small object. It's very interesting, isn't it, all these elaborate things that went on. And so there was a kind of formula. And so they left a little, rather like a man might for a tart, not actually give her the money, but the money would be there in an envelope. And they would leave a little object that was very easily sold to realise some money. It was a kind of tip. I remember Francis Bacon, I remember the story. Francis Bacon was a great painter. He was a great painter. He died a couple of years ago. Francis Bacon was immensely rich. He left £8 million to his boyfriend, John Edwards, who looked after him the last few years of his life. Anyway, Francis, he used to take us to, he was a great host, he used to take us to Wheeler's in Old Compton Street.
The fish restaurant.
Superb. Yeah. And we would sit in the back bar, all women together, supping, and he drank a lot of champagne. And he had a very funny voice. He'd say, yes, I think we'll have a little lunch. He didn't say yes, he used to say yes, which was a big thing. Anyway, we're in there one day, and there were 3 tables of Americans, really preppy Americans, you know, who really knew a lot about England, and they were having this very expensive lunch, you see. And Francis was there, and Geoffrey Bernard, Conan Nicholas, Dan Fasten, and me. And so Geoffrey suddenly, Francis said, Geoffrey, now you've lost your looks, how are you going to earn a living? And so one thing led to another. They were talking about Sid Charisse and growing old. And we were deluding into it, because Americans don't like to talk about growing old. And Francis knew he had this amazing genius for disturbing people. And he knew it was causing a crisis among the Americans. It was spoiling their lunch, you know, which is what he was in. And the waiters, when Francis went into the restaurant, people adored him, because he'd say to the waiter, are you going to be attentive? And the waiter would say, see, Monsieur Bacon. He'd say, right, here's a 50 to start with. To start with, what a wonderful phrase. So the waiters, you know, absolutely adored him all of it.
I can imagine. Yeah.
So when the Americans say, who was that dreadful man? They'd say, he's Mr. Bacon. Oh, so they were thinking, who is this dreadful? And he was wearing leather gear, you know, he was with roués like me. Anyway, he suddenly started out on this story, and he said, because he never gave up the cruising, he said, you know, I was in Paris the day before yesterday, Geoffrey, and I was very bored. I was at the Georges V, and suddenly I didn't know the time. And I said to myself, Francis, I think it's time you had a little watch. Absurd way to go on. He said, you imagine something. He said, so I went and got myself a little Piaget. He said, yes, it was only £9,000. So the Americans instantly translated that into dollars. You know, then they were slightly impressed. So he said, anyway, he said, when I got back to London, he said, I went down to Waterloo Station, he said, and I pulled a Matelot. So one of the waiters told the Americans what that meant. He pulled a sailor and got him back to South Kensington. He said, anyway, there I was, lying on the bed like a Vestal Virgin. This is Francis 79. And anyway, I suddenly thought to myself, he's not having my Piaget. Just to come back to the... So he said, I slipped it off like that. He said, and I popped it under the mat. Just at that moment, out he came. 3 strides, Geoffrey. He was ever so athletic. 3 strides from the bleeding bathroom. 1, 2... went my fucking Piaget. The Americans were appalled by this, and Francis waiting with infinite malice till they appalled. They were just getting over that pain, and he remarked, "It was the most expensive fuck I've ever had."
He was enjoying their discovery.
Absolutely. You know, so he was abusing them by his extravagance and, you know, the watch being crushed by a randy sailor and all that sort of thing. And so, because he lived in that time, when Francis Bacon came into Soho, people used to whisper. They'd say, Francis is on the piss. Because, you know, he worked in a very disciplined way. But when he'd finished working, whatever it was,
he had to get out of him. Then he'd hit Soho, he lived in South Kent. He'd hit Soho. And Francis Bacon was there, and Dan Fast, and Jeff Bernard, and me, and Francis, used to, never mind a few quid. Francis used to have a lavatory roll of 50s, Absolutely incredible, but, which he'd dish out to waiters, paying their mortgages if they were nice. So this caused a lot of attention. He was very welcome everywhere.
I should imagine.
Yeah, and in the colony room, which is a bit like this, except it was green in the colony room, we'd all be hugger-mugger, avoiding life. That was the technique, wasn't it? The escape from life was the actual act of escape. We were looking all the time for these escape routes, and the escape routes were us locked together, drinking champagne and talking bollocks, sometimes eloquent bollocks, but and then if you picked up a few insults or something, you'd move off to another cabaret, which would be the French pub, or onto the Coast of Horses, or the Dirty Duck, or the Swiss Tavern. And we were on this circuit of this terrible roundabout of self-destruction.
If I may interrupt you a moment, it's very interesting.
Well, if you must have gone.
When you left being a monk, you did national service at about, 21? Were you there? And it was there you started to learn your love of acting.
Well, no. I think that's another misapprehension. I learned acting, you see, as a capacity, I suppose. You can say in a small room like this. I don't blame you if you find it ridiculous, but acting as a game, isn't it? An art, or whatever you want to actually see, where people feign or fake emotions.
Yes, I suppose they do.
So, in other words, actors are fakers. When it's very beautiful, perfectly done, especially with verse in Shakespeare, it carries the music of the verse carries. You think that was marvellous. And in more modern plays, there are wonderful actors and actresses. Not many, but there are some wonderful. And they move you, and they do it for you, and you think, yes, and you're nourished. Now, obviously, when I was going to church, going to confession at 6, I had to be quite ingenious because nothing much was happening to me at 6, except for the bombing and the old ladies bursting into flames. And the other old ladies sitting in the area shelters with their knees wide apart, as is the wont of old ladies. They get terribly immodest, don't they? But anyway, that's another sad story. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, old ladies now, middle-class old ladies, they have their children buy them they have these little implants of magnets. Like that. And so when they sit down, their knees... Otherwise they sit like that, don't they? You're shouting, Winnie! Yeah, close that door. Oh, anyway, so when I was going to church, it's amazing recalling these things. You had to be inventive, because you couldn't go... Because you were self-loathing, people would often say to you, tell me, Baker, in front, because we had these classes, these self-loathing classes. And Father Deacon would say, on the subject of we are nothing, what are you, Baker? You say, I'm nothing, Father. Say, what did he say? He said he's nothing, Father. What are you? I'm nothing, Father. Baker, I'm nothing, Father. Say it loud, I'm nothing, I'm just nothing. Don't you ever forget it. Can you say it in Latin? Domini non sum dignus, Father. Yeah.
I'm impressed.
Well, that's right. But I mean, that's all part of the eloquent drama of putting over a point of view. Nothing was left to chance.
You can speak Latin fluently, can you?
I can say I'm not worthy. Sometimes I still say it. But I mean, no one believes me, or no one talks much Latin now. So we had to get terribly inventive, you see. And the only way you get inventive, there's no such thing as kind of innate, imagination. You have the innate capacity. But it comes from the stimulus of the things that happen around you. So other boys would tell us what to do, what to say, because we didn't know. You couldn't go to confession and say, Father, it's a week since my last confession, and since then I haven't committed a sin. You couldn't say that. That was a sin. We didn't know that. But I mean, so you had to say, I've been disobedient, or to my mother, or I've had an impure thought. That was very popular. That's right. So we made up. So I began to become a very accomplished liar, which is another facet of acting, isn't it? It's lying. So all that stuff about, and then trying to please the priest, you'd say, some boys would say, I did an impure act. That was autoeroticism, but then I hadn't met the middle classes at football matches by then. And so you'd say that, and then the priest would say something absolutely appalling, like, did pollution take place? It was an amazing thing. I'd say, well, I'm not certain, Father. He'd say, oh, right. So, you know, because this whole... I hope they're in the picture here. I don't have to be explicit. So that was the way it was, you see. Did pollution take place? It was a dreadful, dreadful way of looking at things, which was reinforced later in the monastery. So my not precision, my facility with words came from those terrible inventions, I suppose, and then also at the same time, this was in the days before penicillin, when life was really rather more exciting, I think, as long as you didn't get tonsillitis or a nail in your shoe. But so people died, you know, very easily, and I went to lots of funerals. And
TB was right.
TB was right. Tonsillitis would clear all the old bags out in the... It was incredible. And so we'd go to 3 funerals a day. And it was at funerals, you know, where I used to swing the incense, that I began to sniff incense with the working class boys. It wasn't against the law then. They still hadn't rumbled that. And so we were sniffing incense, mostly to alleviate our hunger. But this also, rather like Abbott's Green King, caused hallucinations. And we couldn't tell the one from the other, you know, because, I mean, the thing is about being a Roman Catholic, a very dedicated Roman Catholic, produced incredible internal tensions, you see, because, first of all, you believe that God is everywhere, which shatters children, that God is absolutely everywhere, so you're being watched. But not only God is everywhere, but you've also got your bloody guardian angel on your shoulder, you know. This meant going to the lavatory was a terrific ordeal. You were a bit shy. But there you were, grunting at stool, knowing that you were being watched by God and his angels. You never got any peace at all. And this was reinforced later on in the monastery, because this was deeper, more deeply believed. And so you were very carefully watched by everyone else. Rarely one, the rule said, rarely one. Never two. Never two. Always at least 3. And these long silences and supervision. So this all, looking back on it, was preparing me for what I was to do, which is, you know, to tell my part of a story in a play as an actor. It was, you're quite right, when I got to the army, in the medical corps, they were rather theatrical because, you know, they were quite near their university days. All the officers were doctors, had to pass the time. They got up to lots of theatricals, you know, and I began to take part in them. And then when somebody said to me, you could do this, that's when I flew for it. But, you see, I didn't know, working class boys and girls didn't know how to do things like that. Lower middle class boys and girls, 30 years ago, didn't know what to do. You know, their teachers, who were bright and had all been to Oxford, girls who, you know, got to Oxford 30 years ago, occasionally some of them became doctors. Very few of them became architects or big senior managements or whatever. You know, they went on to teachers' training college and became senior secretaries. You know, people didn't know how to break out of Southampton or Liverpool, where I was. I didn't know how to become an actor. You know, no one in our family ever went to the theatre. So we didn't know what to do. But when a doctor said to me that I admired, Dr. Stafford said, you know, Tom, you're very funny. You should be an actor. I thought, well, that sounds okay. I'd like to do that. Without quite realizing that's what I've been doing on and off for a long time.
You've been trained without realizing.
That's right. We are all, in a sense, being prepared for something if your luck coincides with what you can do. And so there I was, you know, all prepared. And then he just rang the sergeant in the education corps, who said, yes, what, actor, fucking doddle, here we are, Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, all these lists there, and you wrote off. And when you were in the army in the 50s, in the early 50s, when you came out, it was very easy to get grants if you could get accepted to a place. I couldn't get anywhere academic, of course, because I wasn't good enough. But when it came to acting, an acting school, Liverpool were terribly impressed that I got into about 3 places. And they said, this fella, you know, has got some kind of ghastly facility to be convincing, even when he's not telling the truth, or especially when he's not telling the truth. And so that's how it all got going, yeah.
Jumping ahead a bit, is it true you were at a review in York playing, I think, a dog or some kind of animal, when a talent scout from the National Theatre spotted you?
Well, that's right, yeah, that's right. I was playing it was a cultural review. In York, years ago, there used to be a big music festival, and there was no fringe at all. And so a friend of mine, and I was at the York Theatre Royal, I jacked that in. And we wrote a review called Late Night Lowther, because it was in a pub called the Lowther. And we had a stroke of genius. Laurie Taylor, the broadcaster, who was then an actor with me. He later on became a professor or something. But so Laurie Taylor and I wrote this thing. We knew lots of people, and we you know, because we were shameless, of course. The first quality you need is to be utterly shameless to be an actor. Then the second quality is to be half in love with rejection, because that's what you're going to get. I mean, actors get more rejection than Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's true.
They really, and you can't live with that, you mustn't do it. So we had this amazing idea of writing this very funny review to alleviate Laurie being a reader at the university, we got a late night license for Lowther and called it Late Night Lowther. But here's the scam. You couldn't go in for a late night drink unless you had a ticket for our show. So naturally we were a fucking big hit. It was incredible. We were absolutely packed out. The whole pub was packed out because it was a scam. You know, we cheated people because they could only get about 100 people in the room upstairs. But we sold about 400 tickets every night because most of them just wanted the Abbott's Green King, I suppose. And they were all hallucinating downstairs. And we were all making idiots of ourselves as a jazz group upstairs. And someone from the National Theatre, called an associate producer, happened to be in York looking at people at the Rep. They were always on the prowl, you know, looking for... I didn't know what they were looking for. They weren't looking for just competent actors, they're ten a penny. They were looking for someone, they were looking for quirkiness, oddity, whatever it was.
Was Laurence Olivier running the National at this time?
He was. And so this fellow sent me a note and said, Tom, why don't you come down? I'll fix an interview. They were very democratic at the National. If you applied... You know, your turn came, and they had these big interviews. It didn't usually mean much because most people rejected. Anyway, but so I went down there, and here's a bit of luck, to meet Laurence Olivier.
You actually interviewed him himself?
He used to sit in. I mean, he didn't actually, you know, he would sit there and terrify everyone, although he didn't mean to. And he'd be surrounded by his staff, and you'd do a few things and answer a few questions or tell a story. But when I went down there, I was still in this play, you see, in this show in York, so I had to go down overnight. Which is slow in those days, and then still get back all the way back to York for the show. And they knew that at the National. They were very nice, you see. And the crisis was, Olivia was held up at some secret dubbing session at Pinewood. And he was very nice and sentimental. And his secretary rang in and said, there's a chap, isn't he, supposed to see yet? He can't come. He's going to be an hour and a half late. So everyone was gathered round me being terribly nice. And so by the time he came, you know, I was absolutely wrecked with anxiety. But I spun them a few yarns. You know, I realised we were no good trying to do modern drama down there. And just on the, you know, the suspicion that they didn't read anything, which was probably right, I just told them a story, you know, and invented. I said, this is a play called Blame Me on History by William Fleming, who's an uncle of mine, couldn't write. I said, it's the part of Charlie, you know, talking to his grandma. And so I just told them this story, which of course I could tell very, very glibly. And they were very impressed.
There must be something there, a germ or something of talent.
Well, I mean, I was trying to impress him, you see. I couldn't impress him by being a reasonable actor, because the place is crawling with them. I mean, it's like a girl trying to become a supermodel because he's pretty, you know. I mean, to be pretty is to be utterly commonplace. In Doctor Who, when we changed the girl over, you know, we'd have 700-800 applicants. And you'd see all these photographs of all these gorgeously pretty girls. So it's a high anxiety there. And to actually get noticed, you know, people sometimes look at you, and you knew they weren't seeing you because you were like the next person, or the next one, or the 10 before. And suddenly, you know, Olivia I could see him looking at me, you know. And then he came up to me himself, and he said, listen, he used to call, when he couldn't remember your name, which was often, he used to call you baby. He was a bit funny that way. But I got to know him, and he used to call me baby, you know, or Boise. I used to call him Sir John. That really used to drive me crazy. Or my dear Lord. But he came up and he said, because he was absolutely autocratic, he said, you must come to the National. I said, what for? Instantly thinking, you know, is he going to name? Because, you know, he said, I don't know what for. It'd be nice to have you here. And there you are.
Doctor, you're being childish.
Well, of course I am. There's no point in being grown up if you can't be childish sometimes. Are you coming?